discussions. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to take you through the outline first. So I'll take you through the integrated national financing framework, then the integrated national financing framework oversight committee, then the development financing assessment, and lastly, the public investment financing strategy. The integrated national financing strategy framework is a planning and delivery tool to finance sustainable development at the national level. This tool was the outcome from the 2015 Third UN World Leaders International Conference in Addis Ababa, in which it was agreed that countries develop country-led and own financing strategies to help policymakers to map the landscape for financing sustainable development and lay out a strategy to increase and make most effective use of all types of financing for sustainable development. Thank you very much. Also, it was to coordinate technical and financial cooperation that countries receive and manage financial and non-financial risks, and ultimately achieve priorities articulated in the National Sustainable Development Strategy or Plan. Now, the Integrated National Financing Framework has 4 blocks. The first block is the assessment and diagnostics. The second block is financing strategy. And the third is monitoring and review. And lastly, we have governance and coordination. So, under assessment, that's where we analyze the financing needs. Then we define the financing landscape and also look at the risk assessment, policy and institutional binding constraints. So this was done earlier, as Director Det mentioned, and it was finalized in 2019. We want to thank UNDP for supporting that process. The second block is now the financing strategy. So under this strategy, we establish robust and sustainable financing mechanisms for achieving the national development plans. We also align the financing options to sustainable government programs, and also align policies and regulatory framework for private finance. Now, the third block is the monitoring and review. So under this, we monitor the progress of mobilizing and spending the necessary financing. So it is not enough to mobilize the financing or aligning the financing without monitoring. Then impact of different financing flows and policies. Then adoption of new instruments and policies. And also transparency and accountability. Then we assess the success of aligning of this financing to government programs and policies. Now, lastly, is the governance and coordination. Without the blessing of our political leaders, all could go to the waste because they don't appreciate what we are doing by aligning the financing to the priorities. Then, government coordination. We need to involve the offices at that high level so that they can help us technically to market out the strategy. Then, now, colleagues, you heard from director's presentation that there will be an oversight committee. Now, in operationalization of the INFF initiative, it commenced with the finalization of the DFA, as I mentioned earlier, in 2019, as was mentioned in director's presentation. So, members of the INFF Oversight Committee, the following are the members of the Oversight Committee. 1, Office of the President. 2, Office of the Prime Minister. Minister of Finance, National Planning Authority, Minister of Gender, Labor and Social Development, Minister of Works and Transport, Minister of Local Government, Minister of Trade, Minister of Education, Tourism, URA, that's Uganda Revenue Authority, Private Sector Foundation, Federation of Uganda Employers, Uganda National Chamber of Commerce, and Local Government Finance Commission. So these, the members, the committee was selected because of the importance of these institutions that they have to play in determining the priorities, and also some of them take substantive resources to meet government priorities. Now, I've already mentioned, and in the presentation of the director, she mentioned the development financing assessment, which was done in 2019 with the help of UNDP. Now, what were the findings of the DFA? 1, it was observed that we need to boost domestic revenue mobilization. 2, capitalize on the full and growing spectrum of financing modalities available if we are to finance our development plans. 3, there's more of an integrated approach to mobilizing and managing development financing. We should not borrow for the sake of mobilizing those resources. Then priority domestic resource mobilization and key measures thereof. Also, realistic national development plans in terms of the maximum potential of each modality, the mix of private finance modalities, as well as access to public financing. And lastly, prioritize public finance management reforms that improve the linkage between planning and budgeting in order to generate results from increased financing opportunities. Now, let me briefly take you through the public investment financing strategy. The public investment financing strategy, that's the PIFS, has been formulated with the following objectives. 1, to improve alignment of financing options to sustainable government programs. 2, minimize the cost and risk exposures of financing modalities. 3, leverage additional financing from traditional and other innovative sources to meet the increasing development requirements. Year in, year out, we are having increasing development requirements, which require financing. So this financing should be aligned to those requirements. Ensure sequenced loan financing and timely disbursement of funds. We need to sequence our loan acquisition so that we don't just acquire loans per se because they exist. So provide a framework for partnership with the private sector in the implementation and financing of public investment programs. Government should not work in isolation, so we should partner with our private sector in order to align the financing to the priorities. Also achieve long-term fiscal sustainability. So, colleagues, let me take you briefly through the financing options that we noted. 1, domestic financing option. Under that, we are looking at tax revenues, non-tax revenues, domestic borrowing, that's through sale of bills and bonds, then domestic bank financing, private domestic investment, pension funds, equity investment financing. So domestically, those are the sources that are available to us, which we can align to the priorities. Now, externally, we are looking at grants, loans, public-private partnership, and foreign direct investment. But also, we have emerging finance options, which include, among others, remittances, philanthropy, crowd financing, climate financing, international bonds, and Islamic financing. So those are some of the financing options, plus others. Now, we have strategies which we think can help us enhance the domestic financing options which I've mentioned above. Now, for tax revenue, we have a problem with tax revenues, especially because of informality of running businesses which are typically unregistered. So this one is a problem because now you cannot mobilize tax revenues with unregistered businesses. But we have developed a domestic revenue mobilization strategy. We hope if this is implemented well, it can solve part of the problem of informality. Also, under tax revenue, we have a problem of large concessions that are extended to industrialists in an uncoordinated and unregulated manner. So these are the tax expenditures. So when you give exemptions and you don't follow them up, then they affect the tax collections. So under domestic borrowing, we have issues of crowding out the private sector. You know, if government borrows more and competes with the private sector, there's a tendency of crowding them out, and they cannot implement their program. So that is a problem. There's also a problem of debt servicing. As you borrow more from the public, that means you have to pay back, and definitely you are now reducing the space for service delivery. So how can we solve that problem? One, for crowding out, we support awareness about domestic financing so that the market can grow wider and be able to mobilize resources from a wider perspective so that the interest rates at which we borrow are low. Also, we need further reduction of, say, withholding tax on some of these securities so that we can borrow at a low cost. Now, there is also equity investment financing. We have issues of double taxation of private equity financing, and also lack of investment-ready companies. So, ladies and gentlemen, we need to create tax transparency status for private equity funds by removing additional layers of taxation. And also through Capital Markets Authority in a partnership with, say, EU and financial sector depending Africa, we need to set up a deal flow facility to get companies investment ready. Under private domestic investment, there is high cost of capital and inadequate infrastructure. So we also need to solve such issues so that we can enhance our domestic financing options. Now, to enhance external financing options, one, we mentioned loans earlier. So the risk of external debt distress arising from an increased share of non-concessional loans. That is a constraint. Also, low absorption of loan commitments that limit the return on investment in a timely manner is another constraint. And also supply-driven debt, which often result in sourcing of loans, financing for projects that are not ready. So acquisition of debt should not be supply-driven, but demand-driven. You don't borrow for the sake of borrowing. So we have other, okay, before that, we have solutions to those problems under loans. Borrowing should be for ready projects, and highly productive investments should be funded. And also, we should monitor the undisbursed loans. Now, another strategy for external financing is public-private partnership. The lack of effective integration of PPPs processes into the broader project implementation management framework. There's also another problem, the institutional misalignment between the implementation mandate of the PPP unit versus that of policy and alignment. So we need to strike a balance there. So, colleagues, let me take you through. I was given a few minutes, but I need to move a bit faster so that I don't eat into the time for other activities. So now, under emerging financing options, these are the new options where we intend to mobilize resources. One, remittances. But we have a problem there which we need to solve. It is lack of affordable and attractive basic financial investment products to trigger economic impact from remittances. So we don't have that. We have a problem on how to manage these remittances to assist us align those funding to priorities. There's also absence of a regulatory framework to govern remittances. We don't have that framework to monitor and regulate the remittances. So what can we do in order to tap into that area? We need to collaborate with financial institutions to address the obstacles and create financial services such as shares in investment funds, insurance, and pension packages in facilitating, to facilitate diaspora investment. We also need to finalize the national diaspora policy as part of a broad national strategy to support the country's development. Philanthropy, under this, we need to engage in or dialogue with and cooperate with the national systems. So actively engage foundations and create an enabling environment for both domestic and international philanthropy. There's also a problem of absence of specific philanthropy law and regulations governing philanthropy, which breeds manipulation from either side. There's also a problem of corporate social responsibility, which is not formalized or institutionalized, and so we need to formalize and also institutionalize the corporate social responsibility. So I think I've dealt much about the options. Now I want to give an example of how we can align the financing to the activities. One, if I take an example of agro-industrialization, we have different objectives under industrial agro-industrialization. So we need to align those objectives to the financing. So if we have agro-processing and value addition as one of the objectives, and post-harvesting handling and storage as another. So how can we align those objectives to the financing available? One, in order to undertake such objectives under agro-industrialization, we can look at domestic private investment, we can look at foreign direct investment, and also grants. So when you look at mineral-based industrialization, we know this one requires massive investment, like under exploration. If that is the case, then we now have to explore options of foreign direct investment, and also definitely you cannot avoid using part of your revenues to finance such an activity. If the objective is to add value, on mining, again, it needs massive investment. So look at foreign direct investment, public-private partnership, and private domestic investments. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think I've taken through most of the financing options, and I hope this will trigger our discussion. Let me take this opportunity to thank you very much for listening to me. I hope it will trigger our discussion. I thank you very much.
Surely after that presentation, and that's all we could do for Moses, eh? Another round of applause for Moses Ziwa. As Moses was speaking, a couple of our stakeholders walked in, and I'll come back to Moses' presentation shortly because I know Dr. Fred will be running through this as we move to session 2. But I wanted to recognize some of our partners from the European Union delegation. Caroline joined us. A very good morning to you, Caro. Thank you very much for joining us. And from the World Bank, the one and only, on behalf of the country manager, we at least have Rachel with us this morning. Thank you very much for joining us, Rachel. So, ladies and gentlemen, the presentation by Moses sets the stage for what conversation Fred will be having this morning. And I can't look at more than what he has done ahead of this conversation because I would like to listen, especially from the panelists this morning. I have, the private sector and you are in the room, but also at the oversight stage, the committee that does look at these policies and pass them on to Parliament. Everyone outside this room is looking for answers around our financing, especially investment financing, but also our debt. And so this conversation is very critical. And I know those who are following on television, and a lot of them, because they've sent me pictures that I am on television. So I'll looking forward to this conversation because they want, and I'm sure Stephen represents the majority of them, who will be wanting to know the way forward. So what Moses has done is thrown the spanner in the works around the policy and what it is it will be looking at. But does it address the critical issues that are affecting Ugandans, that are affecting business in Uganda, that are affecting government and public investment? And those are the answers we will be looking forward to. So I want to quickly dive into session 2 by inviting our moderator, Dr. Fred Muhumuza, to come and invite his panel. And thereafter, look into the issues. I will, Fred, be monitoring your time very critically because television time is not elastic. When they say midday, it means midday. They will cut us off, sir. So, Doctor, please come. Can we put our hands together for Dr. Fred Muhumuza?
Thank you, Maurice. Good morning, everybody. The protocol was observed, so you'll allow me to recognize my panelists as they come through. Fred Muhumuza is my name once again. I'm in all constituencies that have higher institutions of learning. So Makerere University is my space, the business school, the School of Economics, and my tie this morning is Uganda Christian University. So if you want to place me anywhere, don't bother. I'm already there. And I'm also here in the policy spaces, so I want to invite Dr. Francis Mwesije, who is the chief economist at the Uganda Development Bank. Francis, are you with us? Yes, Francis began his career where I passed through at the Economic Policy Research Center. He's a development economist with research interests in applied econometrics and policy analysis. But he works as at the Uganda Development Bank, where he's a senior research fellow. Oh. He holds a PhD in development economics from Tokyo. There is a university there called National Graduate Institute of Policy Studies. Welcome with me, Francis. Let's go to the taxman or the tax people. Mr. Richard Karisa, Commissioner Corporate Services at the URA. Are you in the house? Coming in representing the Commissioner General himself. Richard is a certified chartered professional in procurement, logistics, and supply chain management. He did assume this role of Commissioner Corporate Services in September 2020. So while we were in the lockdown, Karisa was moving upwards in positions of authority and corporate affairs. He has a Master of Science degree in purchasing, procurement, acquisitions, and contracts management from the University of Stanford, Manchester. I know Manchester, the United one. I studied there in some of those years. Stephen Asimwe, where are you? I saw you earlier taking a cup of tea, so you can't tell me you're hungry. He is the executive director at the Private Sector Foundation Uganda. This is the country's largest private sector body. Now, in case you didn't know you are part of the private sector, now you know. If you are not government, even some of you in government, you do private business, here is your boss. He previously served at the Uganda Tourism Board as the executive director between 2014 and 19. He does hold a BA, Social Science graduate of Political Science and Sociology from Makerere University, and Organizational Leadership, which is the Master's US-based Development Associate International. The rest you'll ask him during the coffee time. The CV is long. Dr. Veronica Wabukao, Chief Executive Officer, Kelea Consulting. Online? She will be coming in online. She is an economist and banking expert with 13 years of international banking experience from the United States, specializing in credit risk. These are real issues. When I hear Silicon Valley going under, there was another Signature Bank, I don't know which Swiss. So really, Veronica is going to be the right person to have in this conversation of financing, especially when Moses talks about foreign sourced monies. There are risks there. Please only bring the money and not the risks. Resourceful optimization. She's also a business entrepreneur and CEO of 2 multi-generational retail brands in Uganda, Sisters Bridal, which is celebrating 21 years, and Bra World. I don't want to make any comments on that last one. I might be accused of something I didn't do. She's the CEO and lead consultant of Kelea consultancy firm in Uganda, specializing in business strategy development, marketing, strategy, and execution. Still have now. Where is he? Yes. Why don't you just come up? Dr. Thangavel Palanivel. Me and him have been together, but you can see my problems. He's a senior economic advisor and chief of strategy and policy unit at the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. These ones, by the way, paid for my masters, so when I see them, I respect them. I wouldn't be here. Prior to coming to Uganda, he was the Deputy Director, Senior Advisor at the UNDP's Human Development Report Office, New York, and then Senior Strategy Advisor, Chief Economist, and Head of Regional Strategy and Policy Unit at the UNDP's Regional Bureau for Asia, Pacific, New York. But prior to joining UNDP, he worked at the United Nations University, Tokyo, in Japan. He must have eaten sushi. University of Pennsylvania, Institute of Economic Growth, Delhi. He holds university degrees, including PhDs in development economics. The rest, coffee time. Honorable Herbert Tayewa Musasizi, Member of Parliament. Calling you last was actually a trick because we were on the same table. If I started with you, I would have been accused of having said anything. He's representing Honorable Dr. Kefa Kiwanuka, but he's here in his capacity, so the questions we are going to ask him, he will answer in his personal capacity as a Member of Parliament and member of the Committee on Finance, Planning and Economic Development. Here is my panel. I have a lady who is online, and I did that deliberately. Agreed? Agreed. Let me start with the private sector person. Stefan. Globally, the private sector is definitely recognized as a player in the achievement of sustainable development goals through the role it plays in mobilizing deployment of financing. Even all these guys that government is doing is for the private sector. We want to believe. So the issue of mobilizing and deploying resources, financing and fostering technology transfer and very many other things, innovation that should lead to rapid economic growth. So in this regard, this PIFS recognizes the importance of the private sector. You will tell us whether they do in the development financing landscape of Uganda. But the question is, what should be done to ensure that significant amount of the private sector financing is invested in the key SDG areas, such as education, health, energy, transport, and digital transformation? Meanwhile, Moses Ibekabia, there is a chair. It is so hidden behind me, I'm not sure whether people will see you. I wish this was there. Is this really anchored here? Give me a handheld because I want to be able to see Moses. You see, I hadn't even seen there is a chair for him behind me, and I didn't want him to stand.
Thank you, Dr. Muhumuza, and good morning, everybody. All protocol observed. Stephen Asimo is my name. I'm here on behalf of the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda, but generally, I'm here to represent the private sector voice. So first, I would like to thank Maris and your team, the World Bank and the UN for this conference. It's timely, at a time when we are coming close to that famous budget speech, but the necessity to have that intervention is timely. Because of time, I'll just be quick to the point. One, the private sector, as Dr. Ziwa mentioned earlier, has a couple of constraints. So I'll just reply in the context of how then that intervention can come in. Number one, the issue of high cost of doing business is known to everybody, largely in the context of inadequate infrastructure. You all know what's happening these days. Heavy rains. It now takes us a couple of hours to reach office, business areas, delivery, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, the high cost of capital is big. Challenges of getting supplies, facilitating business, the issue of skills, which speaks into what Dr. Muhumuza said, the area of capacity. Entrepreneurship, of course, is big. Industrial skill sets, new technologies, the need for an enabling environment, especially in the area of small and medium enterprises, startups. We have the highest rate of starting business in the world, and yet we have the highest mortality rate in about 3 years. So there are those challenges that are coming, governance issues, corruption, etc. You all know that. Domestic borrowing has been mentioned. So what do we need to do? I don't want to go into the clinical issues of diagnostics. They have been mentioned very well. Number one, in no order of importance, I'll start with an area which is very close to my heart. Dr. Muhumuza told you I was CEO of the Tourism Board, UTB, for 5 years. Between 2014 and 2019, our tourism arrivals grew from anywhere between 700,000 to about 1.6. In terms of GDP contribution, it emerged as number one. Fast growing sector. In tourism, we sell experiences. Uganda has the best of everything. Equator, snow on the mountains, the highest number of bird species, the largest water expanse of, second largest of water in the continent, great people, food, wildlife, nature, culture, heritage, etc. I think, in my view, we need to put a lot of emphasis on tourism and the hospitality area. That's an area that has been grossly underfunded. Just the intervention of about $10 million in the 5 years that I was there increased GDP inflows in terms of visitor stay and visitor spend by a huge margin. And tourism emerged as the number one foreign exchange earner. Against countries, even in our neighborhood, we have a better, in my view, and I'm marketing here, a better experience. Just for example, in 2014, we had one airline, Ethiopian Airlines was arriving once a day. By 2019, we had 6 flights a day. The numbers increased, plane sizes expanded, so I think that's an area we need to look at. Urgently, critically, it is a low-hanging fruit. In 1 year, you can turn around your tourist arrivals. Check Nyege Nyege, you will give me the results. That's just for example. The second one, which I would like to suggest, I think Dr. Ziwa mentioned, and I'm now trying to move away from some of the traditional issues. I'll come to the rest later in a bit, is that diaspora bond. By about 2014, I think the amount of remittances was about $1 billion. It's come down a bit. I think that's an area we need to strategically look at and create a reserve fund that can be used for things like infrastructure. It's not a new thing. Many countries are doing it. Check countries like Mexico and Palestine. The amount of resources remitted to those countries by the diaspora is massive. At PSFU, we've just discovered a very interesting market. The diaspora market is now accounting for some of our best exports. 500,000 people in Dubai, all consuming matoke, Ugandans. They now have centers like Ruombo, Katogo facilities. Big time. It's a very interesting game changer. We went to South Africa recently, 500,000 Ugandans, big time. So we need to start looking at some of these critical markets and creating a good facility that can be tapped into. The third one, in my view, is the extractive industry. So minerals, gas, geothermal, a lot of these mineral and extractive industry, oil and gas, are fantastic. Uganda has some of the best and huge deposits of close to 47 different minerals. I think government needs to put some justice in this area. Working with our donor partners, our development partners, that's an area that, in my view, has not been largely looked at to ensure that we can create. The other one is mentioned was the philanthropic facility. At PSFU, we are working with, we're coming up with a strategy for a catalytic fund. There's trillions of dollars out there, and if you have a good strategy, we can actually go and present some very good strategic inputs in that area. I know Dr. Muhumza is coming to me, but just quickly, Mr. Moderator. One is we need to invest more money in transport, in infrastructure. Just quickly to tell you that Bwindi and Mugahinga national parks are the home to 57% of the world's mountain gorillas. 60% of our earnings on wildlife tourism actually come from those 2 national parks. The road between Rukunjiri and Rushaga, the Mugahinga areas, has not been worked on, and yet that's where most of our resources from tourism come from. And this accounts for about 45% of our total revenue collections, broadly speaking. So we need to invest in that. The other one is railways. I think we need to fast-track the intervention in the railway system, especially to reduce on costs of transport and logistics. I talked about traffic jams. Mr. Muhumza, Dr. Muhumza, you'll know that we lose 52 working days in traffic jams. and about 2.8 trillion shillings of GDP in that area. Air transport, very, very critical. We need to invest money in Uganda Air Cargo, which is our biggest cargo haulage facility. Cold storage facilities, very, very important. We need to invest more in the lake, especially to support the marine. The other one, which is very important for us, is the investment in irrigation, water for production. Statistics show that we've been very weak. We are only dependent on rain-fed, and that is affecting our agro-industries. The other one, of course, is labor, universities, skills capacity building, entrepreneurship skills. My time is running out. I have so much to talk about, but I thought that those were some of the critical areas to put money for investment, especially to spur that development that is critically needed in the short, medium, and long term. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And the assumption thereafter is that when all that is done, households will have sufficient money to take charge of the remaining balances on their health, education, and welfare. These are SDG areas. We want to get beyond a level where everything must be government, but government must facilitate the households to take charge of their spaces. I hate it when we want to begin a school feeding program as government. I'm like, when these children are on holidays, what happens? Then it will become a village feeding program. Eventually, we must empower the households to find their food. We can't feed them all the way. But how do these investments relate to those SDG core areas of the households? I want to get to Dr. Veronica. I hope she can hear me and see me. Soon I'll be able to see her. So the IT people, please make sure. One way of resolving traffic jams, why don't we work from home or from near home? Some people's homes are not tailored and structured for office work, but there is a place near home where you can work from, as long as you don't convert the bar into a 9 a.m. agenda. Veronica, if you can hear me, we're looking at an environment really that has been discussed where fiscal space to finance domestic investment is very, very tight. Partly because our domestic savings, which play or are supposed to play a critical role, are limited. And we have made limited progress in mobilizing domestic savings. The question really is, how can Uganda enhance domestic savings? What kind of institutions and innovations or innovative instruments are needed to harness financial intermediation through which these domestic savings can actually be rooted back into the real economy? And without wanting to bias here, I'll get back to that later on. But Veronica, how can we really find those innovative instruments to harness financial intermediation, but also how can we, in the first place, enhance domestic savings in Uganda? Over to you, Dr. Veronica Wabukao.
Please raise your hand if you guys can hear me. So, can you guys hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, at least I can, and everybody in this room, I think they can.
Okay. Okay, thanks so much again for this opportunity. I'm Dr. Veronica, and I'm here to talk about how we can enhance savings in Uganda. Just a brief introduction about me has already been given. I'm an economist, and I have worked on a couple of projects in Uganda for the government that has to do with public investment in banking. I've worked on a couple of projects for how we can improve the banking industry. So this topic is very important to me, and it's very crucial, and I'm glad for this opportunity to be able to speak about it today. So to start with, I'm talking about how we can enhance domestic savings in Uganda. And the way I'm approaching this is, I think we should be looking at this at the regulation in Uganda first and foremost to be able to save. And I believe that because most of us are low income in the country, the everyday person is the most important element in the saving structure here that we need to enhance in order to increase our domestic savings. So I'm going to take this at basics, and let's look at it in terms of, if I'm a Ugandan, what do I need to do to save? So look at the prerequisites of saving. In order for me to save, the first thing that I need is I need to have income. I need to have enough money to live, to survive, and then I can save whatever is rest. it is left. Number two is I need to be interested in save my money as opposed to using it for something else. What is the benefit for me in saving? That's number two that I believe is a prerequisite to saving. And number three is you have to have a bank account, and there must be banks. So banks are very crucial in this equation. Make sure we increase domestic savings. Banks are the key instrument that we need here. So I'm going to talk about the role of the government. I'm going to talk about the role of the access to credit. I'm going to talk about the role of financial literacy. I'm going to talk about the role of the formal sector, the role of the informal sector. We are going to talk about telecommunications, and at the end of it, I'll give just a brief highlight on the strategies that I think have to be income segmented in order to achieve this objective. So to start with, let's talk about the role of the government. The simplest thing that we know is the national ID is very important. In order to have the bank account in Uganda, you must have a national ID. It's part of the anti-money laundering requirements. For every bank, a bank must know every customer that they have. Before a bank can open a bank account for anyone in this country, we must have a national ID. So the national ID is the most important element if we really need to increase domestic savings. We need to make sure people can actually have a channel of saving in the formal sector, and that requires a national ID. So the government, this is the main that we need to work on. I don't have the specific statistics, but I think we are not as high on the number of Ugandans that have national IDs. And if you don't have a national ID, you cannot have a bank account, and without a bank account, you cannot save. So this brings in the role of the government to make sure that as many Ugandans as possible have national IDs. So when we get to pushing for domestic saving strategies, all people need to do is apply for the bank account. But right now, national IDs are limited. Number two for the government to play is income. We are looking at savings, but we need to understand that access to credit and savings are correlated. They come hand in hand, especially for a low developed country like Uganda, because a lot of people don't have money. Before I can save, I must eat, I must send my children to school. So income and access to credit comes in a lot in this element, because we need to make sure that our people can produce for their everyday lives, and then whatever is left is what they will be able to save, and this will increase their propensity to save. So this brings in the issue of access to credit that has been discussed a lot, and what we need to do as a government. So the first thing is we talked about changing this, because right now only people that can get access to loans in this country are the rich. What is that skewing lending towards the rich people? And that means that you have to have collateral in order to borrow for most products. There are very few unsecured products on the market. So that means that if you're an everyday person that would like to save in the future, but you'd like to produce today and you need a loan, you're struggling a lot. Some of the policies have already been discussed. We have the NPL, which is the non-performing loans percentage. If a bank is going to lend to 100 people in this country, the requirement is only 5 of those can default. So if I'm the bank, what am I going to do? I'm going to choose the people who I know can pay, and they're the rich with collateral. So we have a lot of banking policies that are just skewing lending towards the rich, and this is one of the elements that I think we should look into. We also, there are discussions going in about investing in our public banks, because a lot of the strategies that are going to them, but this is the market economy where it runs. You have public banks and those as our instruments for pushing policy and changing the lending culture in Uganda. And through competition, if we capitalize our banks and they become really competitive, whatever they do, everyone else does, because really banks is about sharing best practices. And if you notice the top banks in Uganda, what they do, everyone else does. So if we improve our banks in Uganda, they are that good, then they will be able to influence a lot of changes by just doing what we Ugandans want them to do. Everyone else is likely to follow. So that's another element where the government should get involved. I would also like to talk about financial literacy, because in order for anyone to save, if you are going to push domestic savings in Uganda, every Ugandan must understand why it's important to save, because it's really a benefit cost analysis. If I'm making a decision, I have my 10,000, whether I'm going to save 1,000 of that or spend it on something else, I must value savings. So financial literacy is one of those elements that is going to be crucial for this strategy to work. In order for us to mobilize domestic savings, people must know why it's important to save for your future. In the rest of the world, saving has actually become a culture. From the day a baby is born, they are given a piggy bank. And that piggy bank sits next to that baby, and we all put coins and coins and coins for that baby. And when that baby is grown up, every time they ask for something, the reference is your piggy bank. Would you like to get some money from your big bank? So these are some of the simple things. The rest of the child is instilled into saving from birth. They learn to save by the way they are behaving at home. Piggy banks, little things are being introduced, and I think in Uganda we also need to introduce financial literacy at earlier stages. Maybe not at birth, but by the time I'm also recommending us implementing financial literacy in our schools, and if we add it to our curriculum, and by the time a child is growing up, they're being instilled into saving, they're being instilled into understanding what they need to do to get loans, they're being instilled. This is also going to de-risk our population so people can get loans, get income, and save. Also going to make our domestic savings. So the third element I would like to talk about is the role of our formal banks. Like I said, banking, whether going to be to put money into the formal sector. So when we look at the banking sector here, the most important element here is other operations of banks is high, but if you look at the saving rate and you compare it to the lending rate, it's really very low. If I have little money, it doesn't make sense for me to save if my lending rate, my saving rate is not in my favor. So I hope that the banking industry will have to look at the saving rates as well to see how best they can foster people to bring in more money to save. Another element that we'll need to look about are transaction costs. I've worked with a lot of employees and a lot of my peers, and when you tell them, please, can you just go and open a bank account? I have one of my employees at home who I told, I can only pay you if you go to, I want to pay you through a bank account. And he told me that, you know, the aunt, if I send my money to the bank, I get back less. That's all he said, and I didn't ask any further questions. Because when you send money in, the fees, transaction fees start rolling up and rolling up. They really don't understand. Maybe financially to them as to what they need to do to make sure that the savings account does not incur costs. But there are so many transaction costs in the bank that are discouraging people from saving. Another element that we need to look about is the minimum deposit and minimum balance. There are banks in, I believe it was a bank in Ghana that actually opened up and they just gave zero deposit as saving account. As in, you can save as little as you can. This is the economy we are in. If someone is coming in with 5,000 shillings, let them save it. Don't tell them about your minimum must be so and so, because then we are discouraging the average person from coming in to save, because maybe they have 1,000. But imagine someone saved 1,000 a month and it's about 12,000 a year. Multiply that by a given percentage of their population, we are in billions. However little that money comes. So zero deposit should be encouraged, as low as possible. The minimum balance and the minimum deposit should be reduced to encourage people to come in and save because they're really low income. The next one that I'm talking about is how do we enhance the informal sector to make sure that the money that they have is coming into the banks. We're looking at the circles. There are so many circles here. Circles are doing business with the average person. Circles understand the customers better. They will be better at mobilizing, and they do mobilize. How do we get those savings to actually come into the formal banks? It's one of the questions that we need to answer. I read somewhere about, again, another by Barclays Bank that used what they call like sukus, are like agents. You know how we have these agents or the leaders of the SAC. They managed to convince these leaders to be depositing their savings for their groups into the banks for a given fee or some benefits, and that works for them. So that's circles are going to be a big element of this. In circles. So how do we get circles to actually move money from there into our banks? That's another one to look at. And another also mentioned most or if we're looking at the average person, you're keeping all your savings in either cows, you're keeping your savings in maybe the maize that you've grown that you're going to sell. So all the strategies that we develop for savings must apply to the everyday household. And what does an everyday household want? Accessibility. Can I save as much as whenever I feel like the bank's accessible? Number two, can I save in small denomination? Because these guys don't have a lot of money. So we need to be able to save as little as we can. And can I save as frequently as I can? So that's all those three elements have to come in to make sure that we are harnessing domestic savings and the household in Uganda, important elements are getting strategies that apply to their behavior and the way they live will be crucial. Now, lastly, I would like to also talk about the telecommunications. Our mobile money is everywhere. So how do we use mobile banking to enhance savings? How do we make sure that someone can open a savings account on a phone? How do we make sure that someone can deposit at any point, as much as frequently as possible using mobile money? I'm in Nairobi right now, and if you see the way Kenya works with the M-Pesa, you'll be very impressed. A few days I went to buy some. I was buying maize, you know, the roasted maize by the roadside. And I asked this guy. I said, I didn't have cash. I said, you take. And the guy looked at me and said, Mama, we are digital. We're Lipani M-Pesa. And I was paying about 600 shillings. This guy I was just overwhelmed by how quickly money is moving in Kenya compared to how it's moving. We're going to use to enhance savings in Uganda. We need to consider income. So my last recommendation is whatever strategies that we develop must be income driven. Here are some examples. If I'm looking at the high income, I can cut it. I can come and say, I hope for encouraging them to save. Save maybe for an interest rate. Saving interest rate may be a fixed deposit account, savings account. Because if you don't really need the money, you can save and leave it there. If you're still high income but you're a business person, we can encourage you to save. Save to lend is what I'm recommending as well. Because if someone has an incentive to save, they are going to save more. So if we had a strategy that was saying that your high income, if you save up to 20 million, get the loan, being said, right, move their money from anything else that they would have done to bring it into the savings account to help our economy. So we can have a self-to-lend model that can apply to high income and middle income. Small businesses as much, most of us struggle with money, and we are ending up trying to scrape as little capital as we can, and our businesses are not growing. I told you I'm a business entrepreneur as well. Our businesses are not growing because we can't get much capital. But imagine I had a bank that told me that, look, Dr. Veronica, if you can invest this, you can save this amount. However little it is, you're likely to get a loan that will help your business amount. That's something that is going to push me into saving and it will encourage me to save more. So that will be a save-to-lend model. Now, we do have a lend-to-save model, which is the model that is going to apply to a lot of Ugandans because most are low income. Lend-to-save means if I don't have enough to eat today, I cannot save. So access to credit is going to be very important. People will need to borrow money to produce, and once they produce, they have enough to sell, and once they have enough to sell and leave, they can save some more. So a lend-to-save model is going to be more applicable, and the way you apply it is, I'm going to give you a loan of this amount, but I would like you to save this amount, and make sure you save at least this amount every week or every month towards your future.
Thank you.
That strategy is happening at Pride Bank, I think. So the lend-to-save model is something that is going to be very important. So at the core of everything are the banks. I conclude by saying that we do have our own public banks. Everything I've said, every bank, private banks can take it or leave it. But once we have our own infrastructure where we can influence the banking culture by implementing those strategies by ourselves and everyone else learning from us, that will be the best alternative for this strategy to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
I haven't been so far.
Stay safe in Nairobi, where you are. As a Ugandan, you would know how to manage those few situations that happen across the globe. She's given us quite a number of things. I don't want to delve into them at this point in time, but really spoke for the bottom of the pyramid. Some of these initiatives are already in Uganda. I've seen some people saving on mobile money. By the way, Momo, the last report I read, they had transacted over 92 trillion shillings last year. So there's a lot of already money moving on those platforms. That's just the MTN line. The MTN system, we are yet to add on the Airtel. This economy is 162 trillion. So if Momo alone is moving 92 trillion, then you know the power of technology. And that's power of policy. If you have the right policies, you have the right infrastructure, you need to be borrowing for some of these things. So if you are borrowing for ICT investments, backbone, I think we are beginning to see that that's a good borrowing. So if you borrow for wrong things, me and Moses will have a fight in the boxing ring and we'll switch off the light so we'll not know who beat the other. But at the end of the day, one of us will win. UDB, you are there mobilizing money for the big ones, and the small ones as well, or maybe from the small ones to the big ones. So Uganda Development Bank basically is about, it's a national development bank. This is the one we have in the country. Supposed to play a very critical role in provision of affordable financing. I want to really give you a little time. I didn't want to interrupt Veronica, just in case her internet does not allow her to get back. But for you, I would certainly pop in here and there and try to make sure I will have time to get back to you later on. Financing SMEs is partly what people may not think is UDB's business. I don't know whether it is or not. You are going to be telling us. So given that that is the condition, how is UDB planning to mobilize and deploy affordable financing to the key sectors, especially those which are going to promote smart agriculture, manufacturing, renewable energy, and eco-tourism?
Thank you, Dr. Mhumza. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, speaking of how UDB is mobilizing resources to support climate-related initiatives, I'll start by noting that climate change is real, and UDB is aware of that threat. We have all seen what happened last year with the prolonged drought and its effect, driving food inflation, and largely affecting SMEs, which employ majority of Ugandans, to be specific, more than 70%. And specifically, those SMEs remain vulnerable to climate-related shocks. So UDB started a journey in 2019 into this space of green or climate financing. This journey started internally by the establishment of a green finance function or unit in the bank, and thereafter we embarked on creating the right environment at the green finance policy, green finance guidelines, indicators, scorecards, and monitoring indicators, and so forth, which we started implementing, that even before we set aside a fund to support climate-related investments, we found that last year, of those projects that we did approve, about 124 billion were in green-specific investments in the areas of climate-smart agriculture, for example, driving or promoting solar irrigation systems, in renewable energy, or to be specific, clean energy-related investments. And all this really, we are looking at promoting investments mainly in green initiatives that would support in the achievement of the carbon emission reductions of about 24.7% that the country has set forth to achieve and as spelled out in NDC. So we have a number of initiatives, and specifically speaking of SMEs, under our mainstream funding, before even we started embarking on green investments, we have what we call special programs. And this is a program that is targeting SMEs, youth, and women-related investments. So when we embarked on the journey of green financing, we adopted the same model, and we are looking at adopting the same model. I'm talking of we are looking at, because very soon, in about 3 weeks, we'll be launching our climate finance facility, which we are looking at as a vehicle for mobilizing green resources, but also deploying the same resources towards those emission reduction initiatives, and mainly climate smart related investments. So broadly, given time, you said you'll give me another opportunity to speak deeply to these initiatives. Our climate finance facility is looking at mobilizing resources from domestic, both public and private, but also internationally, again, public and private, for example, multilaterals and so forth, to kind of consolidate this funding and make it available for our businesses. We also embarked on the process of green finance accreditation, GCF accreditation, rather, about 2 years ago, and we are halfway. All these are efforts to tap into funding. Now, that is on the finance side. We have other initiatives, related non-financial initiatives, such as business advisory. We call it BASE, Business Accelerator for Sustainable Enterprises, where we train and equip businesses, specifically SMEs, with skills on bookkeeping and other related green initiatives. We have a project preparation unit that handholds these businesses and prepare them to be fundable by not only UDB, but also other financial institutions. On the finance side, we look at debt, but having these climate-related initiatives, they require patient capital, not like many other investments. So we are looking at concessional source of loans, but we're also looking at blending instruments, where we look at grants that can be blended with either debt and equity to avail cheap financing to SMEs. So there is a whole array of arrangements that we really have around that to really drive a climate-smart agenda or in this whole green space. Yeah, I do submit.
Thank you very much, Francis. I'll get back to you later on. Thank you. Thank you. On how you finally find and reach these SMEs. You not being a bank that I can find in Masaka, Muanga Road, in Guru or Porot Road, or downtown in Kisenyi, where do the SMEs find you? Where do you find them? I will be getting back to you with a question on that. Let me go to URA, because a little bit of this borrowing is because URA, I don't know whether they are sleeping on the job, or really because we have no savings. They have nothing to pick from us. Sometimes I really pity them. You chase a person for 2 days, when you finally catch him, they want to borrow money from you. I think it is Malema who said, if thieves break into my house to look for money, I will join them. URA, are you going to join us to look for taxes? So how
taxpayers. From the tax investigations angle, again, using information of exchange and data exchange between us and other countries, we receive this information on the respective tax areas or components, but also on the tax havens. This gives us advance information that we use, one, to reconcile taxes payable, but two, to ensure compliance. Still relying on the different technology platforms, currently at URA we are handling issues of VAT fraud under the tax investigations department. VAT fraud is, if I may use simple terms, VAT is supposed to be an input-output tax. But you find that, without mentioning names here, not in this room, without mentioning names, we have had to manage VAT fraud under our tax investigations department. And since I have this platform, if I can use it, if we can relay this information that VAT fraud, one, is, it impacts on tax administration, but two, it has adverse effects in the fact that you are impacting already tax collected by the government, but you are getting a VAT refund in a fraudulent way, which impacts on the compliant taxpayers, and yet this fraud is committed on tax that has been collected transparently. Now on leveraging on technology to bring the informal sector or the informal taxpayers, would-be taxpayers on board. Dr. Ziwa and my colleague from Private Sector Foundation allied to this. There is a high level of informality, but at URA what we are doing now to bring the informal sector on board, one, working with other technology companies, we are launching a USSD. USSD is an unstructured supplementary data that is a short way of collecting revenue for the informal sector. With all due respect, maybe the border industry. We are aware that we have more than 1 million border riders in this country. So if each border rider was to pay 20,000 across the board, that is 20 billion that is uncollected. But because of that informality, some of them may not be at ease using the feature phones, or what you call the smartphones. But this USSD function, you can use it with the smallest phone that is analog, popularly known as Katochi. It does not require internet. All you have to do, as long as you're connected on the network, you can easily, the way you send mobile money, it will be a star, some number, and a hash, which will be communicating later in the course of the week, working with the telecom companies. This will be able to tap into that informal sector. That is just only one, but there are other several informal sectors that we are trying to bring on board to make sure that tax is collected. Those are the few that I can talk about, but maybe as we go along, I'll be giving more insight and snippets about what we are doing in that area. Mr. Moderator, I submit.
Thank you, Richard Karisa. That's Commissioner Corporate Services, and please stay on the corporate side of him. Don't go into things that's not corporate, because he has said there we are losing even what we have collected. Fraudulently, some people are taking away certain things, but as is mentioned here, I've been seeing third-party information. It's catching me as well. When I pay my water, then I'm told, oh, you mean you've paid water from a place you don't sleep in? Are you a landlord? Then I begin to tell them, no, I don't know. Maybe that's my namesake. But then they tell me, but the same phone number. So third-party information, this is the technology we are trying to follow up. And we think really supporting URA to bring up technology will make life easier. Sometimes you'll find me on a border. Please don't get surprised. I will not have run short of fuel, but I'm gathering data as a researcher. So yesterday I was on 2 borders, and I was asking them how much they make per day. And they say they make about 40 to 50,000 a day. 25, real sector, the real farmers, the cattle keepers, the school owners, the processors can make some money because those are visible. Moses, how are you connecting those dots? Make sure the money coming into bonds eventually ends up supporting the border rider, the school owner, the cattle farmer, and many of those, the people he supervises, the people he represents. Moses Ibekabi is an advisor, economic affairs at the Ministry of Finance, representing that ministry.
Thank you very much. That's why you're giving me actually had time with hard questions. But I think we're talking about government securities. That's where the bonds and treasury bills are. Of course, this is one of the, has become one of the key financing source for a budget. It comes into the budget through treasury bills and bonds. And the investors here include banks, foreigners, and former portfolio investors, pension funds, and other private individuals. When this money comes in, it's actually part of the budget, which is appropriated by Parliament. Set the it finances priority projects. The prioritization process takes a bit of discussion in Parliament with the citizens, with the ministries, departments, and other agencies, and the private sector to see how this money is going to be effective. So it's distributed among the priorities in health, education, infrastructure, roads, ICT, the one you're talking about, agro-industrialization, manufacturing, and those kind of supporting those initiatives in terms of supportive delivery systems by government in order to improve productivity or in the economy as a whole, be it in the real sector, in agriculture, in industry, is in the service sector. I think the key thing is really try and improve productivity. Of course, there are issues of efficiency of utilization of these funds, and not only just government securities, but also efficiency in the utilization of other sources of financing. And the government has been implementing quite a number of reforms in order to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of these funds. The government has also looking at the process for loan acquisition, execution, in order to improve efficiency in that area, improve the return on investment of government investments, and this is how this translates to the local person. Once you lower the cost of doing business, for instance, you have an efficient road, a good road, you have a school that delivers good outputs, you have a health center that is equipped, you have aviation like you, a moderator who travels on aircrafts. It also benefits you, much as you are not the one in the 39 bottom poor. You also enjoy those benefits. So the key thing here is really, in terms of the discussion today, is to how do we diversify sources of development finance. And that's what is critical, because government has been spending a lot of time and effort trying to mobilize concessional financing, but we all know that concessional financing is very limited. So we have to look at other, over the last 5 years, we've been ramping up commercial borrowing, domestic borrowing, which has become too expensive. So we need to look at some of the net debt financing solutions in order to bring about the services that you're talking about, but also achieve long-term fiscal sustainability, and especially debt sustainability. Thank you.
Before I leave you, I'm told you were part of writing the strategy. How is it going to be implemented? Before I go to my friend Palanivel to explain how he's going to support you, and then I will end up with Honorable there, how is he going to monitor and provide oversight on this whole process? So briefly, how is this going to be implemented?
First and foremost, this strategy is a framework. It's going to be a working document. It's going to be a living document. And the strategy here is to work with the private sector, the financial institutions, the investors, the individuals, in order to leverage other areas of financing, especially innovative financing, which are some of the new financing areas. For instance, people have talked about green climate finance, green bonds. We've been looking at financing sources such as Islamic financing. We're looking at Sukuk bonds and other areas, PPPs. And some of these areas have been around for some time. But how do we maximize from these sources? How do we scale up on those that have been delivering? And how do we explore the new ones? So there has been a set up what we call a resource alignment committee, which has membership from various MDAs, and I think probably the private sector, I hope from the private sector as well. And also one of the key elements of this strategy is actually the project preparation facility that has been set up in, under the ministry. It's being financed under the Ministry of Finance, but I think set up under the National Planning Authority to be able to improve on the readiness for projects before they come for financing. And that's very, very critical. But there are a number of strategies for each of the financing strategies that we are talking about. We're going to be engaging various stakeholders in the various areas. They are all articulated in the document that will soon probably be circulated. And we're going to be engaging those. We're going to be working out a detailed implementation action plan in a number of areas anew, as I said. But the key thing here is working collaboratively in partnership with the private sector, with the financial institutions, with the investors, in order to deliver on this strategy.
Thank you, Moses Bekabye, from the Ministry of Finance, one of the authors, and at the heart of the document telling us how it is going to be rolled out. But as they roll out, development partners, and please thank you very much for being development partners. You are partners for development. We really appreciate your role in this space. And you are here represented by Dr. Palanivel. We want to ask, how are you going to support government, you as development partners, specifically UNDP as well, for the government in the effective implementation of this strategy?
Thank you, Dr. Mugusa. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to everyone, all protocol observed. Before I get into the substantive issue, I want to clarify that since I was the part of the organizing committee, this is really a little bit uncomfortable to have dominated by the male panel member. We did try it, actually. Believe me, we did try to have a balanced panel member the last 2 weeks. Somehow it did not work out. But at the end of the day, when you finish this meeting, you would realize that you will have very gender balanced the speaker. The next session, going to have 5 ladies going to speak, led by our resident coordinator, UNDP and the European Union, World Bank. Everyone will be represented by the ladies. So the meeting is started by the ladies, Madam Director. The meeting will end with the Principal Economist, Joy. So we, at the end of the day, we felt that few days back, it is a gender balanced overall. The second one, how actually we going to support the government in implementing this public investment financing strategy. Believe me, it is not like only UNDP. I just wanted to take a minute to highlight that. When 2015, when the international community adopted this integrated national financing framework, it's a kind of, as the commissioner indicated previously, it's a financing framework to support the implementation of SDG, Sustainable Development Goal. In that meeting, they also tasked the UN Development System to support the member countries in development and the implementation of this integrated national financing framework. So Based on that kind of task mandate, the last few years, over 70, 80 countries, the United Nations Development System is actually supporting member countries in the developmental of integrated national financing framework and its implementation. I recognize the Minister, Honorable Excellent Minister. Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to say that actually in 2015, the international community tasked the UN's development system to support the developmental implementation of the integrated national financing framework. You want to say, or can I?
Proceed. The Minister of Finance enjoys conversations of this nature, so he wouldn't want to disrupt your flow.
Okay, thank you.
Honorable Minister, you're welcome.
Okay.
We're happy to see you.
Okay. Honorable Minister, I was kind of just started my intervention, 5 minutes intervention. What I was trying to say that in 2015, international community actually, adopted this integrated national financing framework to support the member countries to mobilize, deploy the required financing for the implementation of SDG. In that meeting, they also tasked the UN development system to support the member countries in the developmental and implementation of this INFF framework. As a result, now over 80 countries across the world, the UN developmental system is supporting the countries to developing this integrated national financing framework. Uganda is one of the pioneering countries in Africa. In Africa, over 30 countries is currently working on this integrated national financing framework, Honorable Minister. The second thing I was actually wanted to update that in each of these 80 countries, it is the United Nations resident coordinator is leading the process at the strategic level. Even in Uganda, our resident coordinator, Madam Susan, is the leading at the strategic level, at the partnership engagement level. UNDP is leading the technical aspect jointly with the other UN agency like UNCDF, UN Women, and UNICEF, and all, working with the World Bank and IMF, European Union, that kind of development partner to support the government of Uganda in shaping and implementing the integrated financing framework. So that I wanted to say at the substantive level, how actually the development partner is kind of planning to support and the financing. In the last few years, even UNDP has supported the government preparation of number of thematic strategy. Today we are launching financing strategy. Last few years, we supported a developmental various strategy, national industrialization strategy. In a month or two, we're going to actually launch the national implementation strategy of the Africa Free Continent Trade, how the country could actually implement the AFCTA. Last year, we also supported the government to prepare and launch of the updated National Determined Contribution Action Plan, climate change strategy. So having done all kind of strategy, one thing is actually the implementation depends upon mobilizing finance, deploying finance. So that is what actually the INFF framework, the UNDP is working with the various partners in supporting the government in how this strategy, whether it is the financing strategy, whether it's a national industrialization strategy, whether it's a national climate change strategy, could be implemented effectively by mobilizing, the required financing globally and deploying it through the private sector and other sources. So let me take a few examples. Currently, we are working with the development partners here, not only with the partner side, with the institution also, Uganda Development Bank, Uganda Revenue Authority, and various components. Let me take the moderated few minutes to give some example how the development system like a UNDP or UN system is planning to support the government. The public investment financing strategy, for example, highlighted that the green bond, the Islamic development bond, is a potential a relevant, suitable financing instrument to mobilize resources for various priority program. For example, if you look into the strategy clearly, the natural resource priority program, the sustainable urbanization program is talked about the importance of green financing. Green bond is a suitable instrument. Similarly, the sustainable energy program. Similarly, the regional development program in the NDP 3. In order to fund that program, talked about Islamic bond, the so-called Sukuk fund, and UNDP planning to support the relevant government partners, how they could actually mobilize the long-term green bond, Islamic bond, to mobilize and deploy there. We had, in fact, discussed with the Ministry of Finance, Uganda Development Bank recently. We, as the Uganda Development Bank said, in a couple of weeks, we're going to launch the climate financing facilities to mobilize resources and deploy that. It's one example. The second example I wanted to highlight that is on the trade financing facilities. Having actually now done or working on the national implementation strategy of Africa-Free Continent trade, one thing is a big problem here is a lack of actually adequate the trade financing. The country used to have 20 years back, Bank of Uganda used to have export guarantee scheme for about 4 or 5 years, but some reason it's discontinued. So we are now discussing with again the relevant government partners the possibility of establishing trade financing facilities with a special focusing on export credit guarantee scheme. So basically the government we are trying to advocate, we are trying to encourage, we are working with the Presidential Advisory Committee on the Export Industrial Development, to see how we could actually try to do some kind of trade financing facilities that would actually boost exports and other things, particularly to channel more investment to the SME sector. That's the second example. The third one, again, we are actually working with Uganda Revenue Authority, how Uganda Revenue Authority could harness, leverage the new technology to address some of these illicit financial flows or address some of the leakages by using the new technology, whether it's the cross-border trade to try to mobilize more customs revenue, or even locally by monitoring effectively all the commercial transaction, e-commerce transaction through using the new technology, how they could collect more, whether it's a income tax or other sales tax, other value-added taxes kind of things. I don't want to take your time, but we are actually working with the relevant government partners in the next few years, try to see how they could actually mobilize more resources, deploy it. We will use all kind of actually the option, capacity development, policy advisory, and promoting South-South knowledge sharing, learning, because some country in Africa, some country in Asia is done reasonably well. We are trying to promote again South-South knowledge sharing, learning. Various approaches, we're going to use it to so that the government could be able to mobilize more resources and channel into the SDG related area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Palanivel. That's part of the UN family. And we have its head here, the UN Resident Coordinator, Madame Susan Ngongi Namondo. You're welcome. We're happy to see you. One of your other constituencies, the UNCDF. They are on the same table with you. Honorable Minister, we're working with the UNCDF to bring to you one of the facilities that can ease the pressure of the financing of local governments. That if a local government has a project they can invest in, we are here crafting a project preparation facility that they can actually be allowed to prepare it, give it a clear oversight system, so that the local governments can also begin to generate their money through the private partnership facility. Honorable Minister, that will be coming to you as soon as you have submitted the budget to Parliament. We know how tight your schedule is. And so I think the best time to transition to Parliament where your budget is headed. And I need to mention all his 3 names because some of his names here are mixed up with other members of Parliament. If I talk of Tayebwa, you know what I'm talking about. If I talk of Musasizi, Honorable Minister has a Musasizi in his house. So I need to mention Honorable Herbert Tayebwa Musasizi. Tell us about your role in overseeing all these things. You are the oversight body, you set a lot of laws, you set a lot of regulations, they report to you for purposes of making sure there is transparency, there is accountability, and oversight. How do you intend to let your committee provide that guidance so that we don't veer off the right track we are on right now? Honorable.
Thank you, moderator. Honorable Minister, my fellow panelists, all protocol observed. Once again, my name is Tayewa Herbert Musasizi. I'm a member of parliament representing the people of Kashonji in Chura district and a member of the finance committee. But besides, I'm also a fellow of certified chartered accountant. I hold a master's in business administration from Edinburgh Business School and a Bachelor of Commerce degree from Makerere University Accounting. I've been at the National Planning Authority as the head of finance for the last 11 years before I joined Parliament. The role of the Finance Committee of Parliament in oversight, Parliament derives its mandate from the Constitution. Article 9 of the Constitution requires Parliament to form committees that would actually help it in enabling its functions or for it to function. And the same article requires that Parliament will have rules of procedures, that these rules of procedures for the committees will give the powers of the committees and the function of the committees. Therefore, the oversight function of Parliament is a result of the law, and the Parliamentary Committee on Finance oversees the Ministry of Finance. Now, the Ministry of Finance is entirely responsible for revenue mobilization and its expenditure. Therefore, the Parliamentary Committee on Finance is at center stage on oversight, monitoring, and examining. When you look at the law, for example, the rules of procedure, Rule 189 clearly specifies the role of the Parliamentary Committee of Finance, the Ministry of Finance. One, it examines the policies and makes a comment. Now, when they say it shall examine the policies and makes a comment, it is a very strong word. Examining, first of all, the strong word is shall, so it must. To examining, it must go in the detail and actually scrutinize and look at those policies, look at those frameworks, and actually make necessary comments where it is possible. Therefore, it has played a very big role with the Ministry of Finance, with its policies and programs. It also actually, section Rule 189(2), it also says it will evaluate or shall evaluate the programs and policies, meaning that when these programs and policies by the Ministry of Finance are put in place, Parliament is responsible to evaluate them and also make necessary recommendations where it is necessary. Now, it's not only the two rules, the rules of procedure or the Constitution, but also other laws. The Public Finance Management Act 2015, Section 12, also mandates Parliament to analyze the policies and programs of Ministry of Finance. Now, the rule does not actually stop on that. It also clearly indicates that Parliament will ensure that public resources will be held, utilized, and for purposes of transparency, accountability, and efficiency and sustainability. Therefore, Parliament, and specifically the Finance Committee, is at the center stage of ensuring that public resources are well utilized. Public resources, there is transparency in utilizing them. Public resources, there is accountability, and they are efficiently utilized. Now, it also goes ahead and says that the Parliament, and specifically the Committee on Finance, will monitor the performance of government, will monitor the performance of the Ministry of Finance. And we also make sure we will monitor how these plans are complied to. So if government brings the plans and budgets to Parliament for appropriation, then it's the responsibility of the Minister of the Parliamentary Committee on Finance to go ahead and ensure that there is compliance. What has been appropriated, is it what actually has been spent? Is there compliance? It also goes ahead to monitor on the performance of both financial and non-financial activities of government. So, all in all, the Parliamentary Committee of Finance is at the center stage on behalf of the whole Parliament to ensure that the budgets, the policies, the programs are put in place and they are well examined and scrutinized and analyzed. And at the same time, go ahead to ensure that they oversee and monitor how monies are being authorized or resources are being authorized. However, as Parliament, we have been finding some challenges. All this well done, but there are some challenges which come in. For example, if the law requires that we shall examine and scrutinize, it means that the Minister of Finance, when it comes up with the policies and programs, they should give it to Parliament to do that. But examining and scrutinizing to be done and get a well-informed outcome, you need time to do the examination. But many times, finance or other agencies come with the documents when they want actually to be discussed there and then. They present it, you discuss it, and they want. You cannot get a meaningful answer out of that one-day discussion. You need time to have gone through it, well scrutinize and examine it. That has been one of the challenges we actually find. Two, the law requires that twice a year, in February and October, the Minister of Finance is supposed to be making a report at Parliament and specifically to the Committee on Finance on how it has spent its money, on how it has performed. And we're supposed actually to also scrutinize, analyze it, and examine it properly well, and come up with information and make recommendations. But if this is not done in the right time, and we have very short times to do it, then we get some challenge. However, we also found out that the law, which has been put there, especially on the budget cycle, has given Parliament very short time. Actually, when you look at Rule 144 and 145, it indicates periods when the budget should be laid to Parliament, when the ministerial statement should be laid to Parliament, what time should be taken to be discussed and reviewed, and then when actually the budget should be approved. Now, the times given are too short. And what makes it worse is that even when the ministries and agencies are asked to bring that information, it does not come in time. So that it gives Parliament less time to review, to scrutinize, and analyze those reports. But we as Parliament, and especially the committee, we are trying to devise means. And how are we trying to cure this problem? We have actually asked the clerk that whenever he writes to Minister of Finance or any agency, let it be copied to us so that we know what time has been given to them on when they should comply and provide this information. If that time given is not enough for us to scrutinize or be able to examine these documents, then we shall refuse not to do it. If they bring it in time and we have enough time to go through it, and we don't do it, it will remain our problem. But if we ask them, we ask any agency to provide the information and be given time to do that necessary review or examine or scrutiny, and they don't do it, then we think we shall advise them to leave it. Because it's like if you bring it, for example, today, and you want me to come up with a decision, it means you want me to rubber stamp, which I think is not good for Parliament. Because ideally, Parliament should also understand it and actually be able to give an informed decision or recommendation. So far, that's where we are. I thank you.
Thank you for saying thank you to Honorable Herbert Tayebwa Msasizi. He raises very, very fundamental issues of Parliament scrutinizing and having enough time to scrutinize policies. I was in Kinoni, which is also in Kiruhura. I don't know whether that is your constituency. Now, When I went there, I sat down with the cattle keepers there. You know, they need a lot of land to look after their cows. So there were 20 households in a parish. Now here is a policy that is saying every parish must have a primary school. Now, should we really build a primary school for 20 households? Knowing very well that school-going children in primary are 6 to 8 years. Knowing very well that households in Uganda are now an average of 5. So you might end up borrowing money to build a school for 20 children. Scrutiny of policies. Before we borrow, are the policies the right thing? Honorable Minister, he has said he's being given little time. It's not for you, it is for your technical people, starting with Moses, who is nearest to me. He has said you need to be reporting in February and October. Moses, you have heard. checked his bank account, but at least in terms of ideas, he's rich. Moses, you link up with him. You have the last slot from the floor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mwamuza. My name is Florence Epodoi, and I work with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights as a human rights officer. Dr. Mwamuza, my concern today is a human rights-based approach. So my first question is, when this document was being developed, was there a human rights-based approach applied? Because I'm seeing at the launch, there's absolutely no human rights-based approach. About 2 years ago, we carried out consultation to support the government on regional consultations to come up with a government report on the CRPD report. And one of the issues that came out clearly as far as investments for persons with disability and the older persons is concerned is the fact that banks do not want to lend them money to do business because of their status as older persons or as persons with disabilities. So my question here today is that we have URA, we have the Private Sector Foundation, we have Ministry of Finance. How inclusive are we when it comes to, for example, lending by UDB? Is there a human rights-based approach? If a collection, maybe a group of persons with disabilities walk to UDB today to come for a loan, will they be supported to get that money? And will they be supported to invest it? I'm looking at this meeting today. It's a very rich discussion that would support vulnerable groups, but we don't have a sign language interpreter, for example. If I was, for example, maybe deaf and dumb, and I was invited to this meeting and I came, would I have benefited from this meeting? Absolutely not. Why? Because there was no human rights-based approach when it came to programming for this meeting. So my question is, as we speak at the national level, how are we actually involving the SDGs as far as leaving no one behind is concerned? Have we left people behind today in this discussion? Absolutely, yes. Are we promoting SDGs? I don't think so. So I think it should be a strong lesson learned going forward. Let's be as inclusive as possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Florence. This is why I wanted the ladies, they bring up the things you may not see. Maybe these people did not invite people who need sign language. Were you fearing the budget for the sign language people? But these are issues we're going to delve into. Now, I have a dilemma of a whole panel of many people whom I wanted to give a minute each to say
Yes,
their...
with doctor with 6 minutes only. I don't know how
Yes.
you're going to manage.
So each, they have had. So each one of you has 1 minute to say your closing note. What is your takeaway? What's your takeaway? And let me begin right with Honorable as I come down the pecking order. So when Honorable finishes, just keep coming this way until I sign it off.
Thank you once again, Dr. Mwamuza. As earlier said, I think in order for this country to progress, for this country to develop, for these strategies and frameworks to work, we need all to do our part. The law is in place, and they stipulate clearly what one is supposed to do. If the ministries, if the agencies and the departments do their work, and Parliament is also given ample time to this work, then I'm very sure we should be able to implement these strategies and policies where efficiently, transparently, and monies would be aligned and they will do what they're supposed to do. So I just want to call upon everybody in this government that let's do our work and do it right. And when we do it right, we shall see ourselves. I thank you.
I knew he was going there, but I didn't want to say. They will settle that in Parliament. They are both members of Parliament. They both have constituencies which have cattle people. Francis.
Thank you, Moderator, Honorable Minister, and distinguished guests. I would like to speak to 3 key...
no, you have one. Just pick one of the 3.
We take it as a delivery mechanism to speak to a number of questions that have come through relating to targeting bottom of the pyramid, PWDs, and the human rights-based approach. As a bank, Uganda Development Bank takes inclusion seriously. not only in words, but through the models that we do employ. And largely we have like 3 models that target that. One is targeting cooperatives and working with cooperatives. We have signed a number of MOUs with cooperatives, women-based cooperatives, farmer groups, and so forth. Can give one example of Uzia that we do work with. 2, we leverage on technology. Now we work with fintechs and agrotechs. And I'm happy to note that next week on Monday, we will be in Yumbe launching one of our key initiatives where we are collaborating with Ensibuco, and that initiative is supported by a number of development partners here, including UNCDF, FAO, EU, and so forth. That initiative is really to help us technology to support organized groups of farmers that are mainly into crop production across the country. And lastly, you talked of how are we reaching out. Those are 2 mechanisms. But the third one is we are looking at rolling out or having a few branches across the country. Because a number of comments have been coming through how can one reach to UDB, a farmer somewhere in Kasese, Yumbe, and so forth. So we are looking out at opening a few regional branches to have our footstep by opening branches and physically reaching those smallholders. Honorable Minister would like to note that really supporting SMEs and the bottom of the pyramid is not only key for promoting inclusion, but it is also key for promoting structural transformation. That if you are to pull people out of agriculture to other segments of the value chains, to industry, to services, you really need to, 1, empower them economically. And that's why we are looking at that as a key agenda for the bank. I do submit.
Thank you very much. As a person who has been in the space, opening up branches, I will come and close them. UCB did, and we got into problems with too many branches. They bring an overhead cost. But a bit of it, Honorable Minister approved agent banking policy, and Parliament approved the law. Right now, I have big banks whose 40% of the business is through agent banking. So how do we leverage these initiatives? So before you open those branches and I close them, let's open up more agents and work through those entities. They are available. But this is a conversation we are trying to get to the human rights approach. How do we reach a PWD, a person with a disability or physically challenged, who can't do 5 kilometers and spend all the money they are going to borrow on transport? Find them right where they are. Yes, sir. The taxman, what is your last word to us? I know you don't tell us to pay taxes, because we need to, we know we have to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Mhumza. Honorable Minister, welcome. My takeaway nuggets are really few. One is to urge all of us, contrary to what Dr. Mhumza said, I want to urge all of us to continue paying our taxes in a compliant manner. We are putting in place technology efficiencies that will help us and enable us pay our taxes in a transparent and fair manner. Now, having said that, if all of us out here paid our equal share of the tax, no one would need to pay so much. So my argument here is let us be as compliant as we can be to ensure that we develop our country, Uganda, together as we start URA, and of course to lessen the burden of borrowing to finance our budget. I thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. I knew you'd have to say that. We need to be compliant and pay our taxes. Anybody who has not paid their taxes for 2022, I know you wouldn't raise your hand, but, and you're likely to be in the private sector. Stephen Asima, the people complying. Your last shot on this one.
Thank you very much.
You don't have to respond to me.
We are very compliant, and the minister knows that. So thank you, Honorable Minister. Very quickly, from the private sector side, we thank government for opening up the markets. We've done close to 8 countries. We've been to South Sudan, DRC, just came from South Africa, Burundi, next week we are going to Rwanda. One of the biggest constraints is export finance. And your Honorable Minister kindly put that on your agenda item. Number 2, my colleague talked about SME. We have a huge lower pyramid base for SMEs. The growth of this economy is going to depend on that. We need support on SME financing, but critically, Honorable Minister, is the need to reduce the costs of Bureau of Standards. Our SMEs are complaining they are very exorbitant and they cannot afford. Number 3, quickly, because of time, energy tariffs, please reduce it. Finance on that so that we, especially the lower strata of the SME production line, we need support on that. Quickly, on transport, very, very urgently, they need to support us on the railways so that we push the cost of $130 per ton to anywhere between 60 and 40 on that. Fourthly, roads. Traffic jams, Mr. Minister, are costing us 2.8 trillion shillings alone. When we computed that, it was 52 working days. Mr. Moderator, 52 working days in a traffic jam amounts to 1.7 months in a year. When you are stuck listening to radio stations and not making business. The other bit is, of course, expedite the public bus transport system to create efficiency.
The next one should be the last one.
Yes.
Because I'm going to create a window for you to
Very
sit on
importantly, Your Honorable Minister, please help on the Uganda Air Cargo. We need that financed so that we reduce on the cost of freight. And lastly, the issue of irrigation. This business of waiting for rain is costing us, and yet we can hit easily our capacities on exports, especially for horticulture, flowers, and of course, aquaculture. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope private sector, you are listening. You hired the best for yourselves. When you tell him to speak for a minute, he has to squeeze in, especially where the Minister of Finance is. Where else do you find the Minister of Finance? Private sector, you have done that well. Dr. Palanivel.
Thank you. I also want to thank all the comments, suggestions, how this strategy could be improved, more inclusive, more comprehensive, more integrated. We take all those comments. Believe me, actually, we did have a very comprehensive validation exercise last year, inviting all relevant stakeholders, almost all their Ministry of Agriculture, all their ministries, even some of the human rights-based organizations, to validate some of the actually key messages contained in this report. We did have a validation meeting, and it's been, captured to maximum extent the importance of how do you actually strengthen the ecosystem, so that we could be able to mobilize the local government revenue, or saving at the rural level, or address the actually gender-sensitive budgeting. So range of issue, we did look into that. We also highlighted the importance of, going with the blended financing approach type, how to actually mitigate some of the risk involved in the lending side, particularly when you lend to the SMEs and all. So I'm not going to take, more time, but my answer is that, as the Ministry of Finance indicated in his remark, this is a working document. This financing strategy is not kind of strategy, is kind of built in a rock, stone, and it will be reviewed every few years, and we would actually make adjustment in this financing strategy as we go along. Once we get all this feedback, try to also strengthen how to actually strengthen in the private sector financing option much more comprehensively, much more integrated manner in this strategy. So this is a work in progress, and this is a kind of starting. When we're going to implement, definitely we will get some lesson learned, and after a few years, we'll try to incorporate those lessons and come out with the financing strategy 2.0 version after 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Palanivel. I don't know whether we have Dr. Veronica online and we are able to catch her. As you try to do that, Moses, you're standing in between your minister and yourself.
Yeah,
you know what that means.
Yeah, thank you very much. The reason why we're here is to launch a framework for sustainable development finance. And the objective is actually to grow the economy, create jobs, and increase household income. I was touched by a question that was raised by the lady who was saying, saving from where? I think one of the key savings vehicles is actually to grow the economy. Once we grow the economy, we grow household income, we can actually grow the economy. And there are initiatives for that. We have the PDM, the Parish Development Model. We have the Myoga Initiative. We have the export strategy. We have agro-industrialization drive that's going on in order to build the value chain from agriculture to industry to benefit households. And then we also have, the Ministry of Finance has financed the UDB, put money there for manufacturing, for SMEs, and this is intended to actually reach the lower person so that they can be productive. The key thing is actually increasing productivity at all levels. One of the key things that the government has done, and I've seen this, I'll give a small story. There is a town, when you're going to Kaweweta, there is a town called Chinyoguga. I've seen that town grow over the last 20 years. It started with about 6 huts, you know, it's a cattle corridor. But when government put there a road, put there electricity, and now they put in water, the economy that has been created around that area, in that sub-county, is immense. You look at all these trucks of milk coming day and night. So the local economy is actually very strong there. So the infrastructure that government has put in place, but also government is actually also balancing social spending in order to increase the skills. The industry needs skills and healthy people. The key thing actually in terms of savings is how do we create these savings products for these people and the investment products for these people. And I think that's why we have to work on, not only for the formal people working in the formal sector, but also for the informal sector, leveraging on technology. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Moses. I hope you have found Veronica. I would be interested in going to Chinyogoga to see whether the people who were there 20 years ago are still the ones who are there. They might have been shifted out, which is a concern of the human rights. The town can grow without the original people who were there. Things are dynamic. The 6 might have vanished. Their land was taken by those who have coolers. Well, these things happen. That's why the human rights concern is a very fundamental things in development issues. Have we found Dr. Veronica, or is Nairobi again having a network problem? People behind in the machines, I need to hear Dr. Veronica. Your ideas, your views, and your physical presence in this meeting. And everybody, thank you for the time well spent. I want to believe we have learned from all this. I'm headed to Chinyogoga. Chinyogoga means something getting cold.
Ladies and gentlemen, surely we can give Dr. Fred and the panel a better hand clap. Honorable Minister, I'll do a very quick introduction so you know who is here in the room. They've already introduced the Honorable Taebwa, who is here representing the chair of the Committee on Finance, the Parliamentary Committee of Finance, Planning and Development. But I want in a very special way to recognize our key partners today who are jointly organizing this launch. The UNDP, and I think before I introduce Sheila, I must introduce her boss, the UN Resident Coordinator, Susan Namondo Ngugi, who is here with us. As we do that, can we clap for our stakeholders? And of course, here with us, Sheila Ngatia, the Deputy Country Representative, UNDP Uganda. We also have representing the World Bank and representing the country manager is Rachel Kagwa Sebude, the senior economist at the World Bank. But also here with us, Honorable Minister, is part of the UN family and the bigger UN family. We have UNCDF, Dimitri. He's head of the office here in Uganda. And we have UNIDO, and the OTO is here. UNIDO country representative, rep, UNIDO, OTO. The minister needs to see you, yes. And the head of cooperation, Team Europe, EU in Uganda, Caroline Andresen. Honorable Minister, we have the private sector, very critical in this conversation. So you have freshly back from Algeria, leading the business delegation there, the President of Uganda National Chamber of Commerce, Ms. Olive Chigongo, and of course the CEO of Private Sector Foundation, Stephen Asimwe, who was on the panel. We have other stakeholders, Honorable Minister, under your agency, NPA, the Deputy Executive Director is here, Charles Oreng, and we want to thank him for being with us, and all our senior partners and stakeholders. May I now take the pleasure of inviting Ms. Sheila Ngatia to come and make welcome remarks, but also let everyone coming after Sheila know that the Minister doesn't have so much time.
Thank you very much, Maurice. Good morning, Honorable Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, the Honorable Matia Kasaija, Her Excellency Susan Ngongi Namondo, the United Nations Resident Coordinator in Uganda. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I stand on all the protocols. I want to bring you greetings also from the United Nations Development Programme Resident Representative, Madame Elsia Tafoya, who is out of the country. And we are indeed honored to be here to participate at this public launch of the Public Investment Finance Strategy. And the official statement from the United Nations system in Uganda will be made by Her Excellency, the Resident Coordinator. So for us as UNDP, because we have been working very closely and we are indeed honored, Honorable Minister, for the partnership with the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, working together with the Resident Coordinator's Office, the World Bank, and other partners. Having an integrated and comprehensive financing strategy is a critical means for effective implementation of the 2030 Agenda. I think that has already been highlighted in the panel before. An estimate by UNCTAD shows that developing countries will need annual investments in the range of $3.3 trillion to $4.5 trillion to achieve the SDGs by 2030. And so this implies that there is a significant financing gap in developing countries from what is the current investment level. And so given the size and scale of these requirements, domestic revenue mobilization or increases in external public finance are not enough. Development requires significant contributions from external and domestic private investment, and which is why this strategy and the issues discussed here this morning have been very critical. With only 7 years remaining before the deadline to deliver on the SDGs, we are far away from where we should be. And so countries' efforts to finance SDGs must respond to an exceedingly challenging global environment characterized by complex uncertainties arising from climate change, inequalities, new technologies, pandemics, wars that we're seeing, and others that are leading to development being defunded. Honorable Minister, ladies and gentlemen, let me just briefly highlight the importance of the integrated national financing frameworks for countries like Uganda. And I don't need to go into detail because Director Maris really highlighted this very well. Mobilizing resources to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and SDGs remain a critical challenge for many developing countries. And as was said before, going back to 2015 to the United Nations Third International Conference on Financing for Development, where the world leaders met in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to agree upon a new global framework for financing the 2030 Agenda and the 17 SDGs. And at the heart of this meeting, the outcome is what is commonly called the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. Again, Director Mary spoke on this. This outcome really highlighted the preparation of an integrated national development plans and integrated national financing strategies to help countries strengthen their planning processes and overcome challenges to financing the SDGs at the national level. So while national development plans are expected to lay out a country's development goals and targets in line with the SDGs, the integrated national financing frameworks, the INFFs, are expected to spell out how these plans will be financed in a sustainable manner. In Uganda, under the overall leadership and coordination of the UN Resident Coordinator's Office, UNDP has been leading the technical aspect of this INFF work in partnership with other agencies, including UNCDF and UN Women. And to highlight briefly some of the support that has been extended to the government under this INFF initiative. First, undertaking development finance assessment. And as has been said before, in 2019, UNDP supported the government through the Ministry of Finance to undertake a development finance assessment to explore the untapped sources of financing and the suitability and feasibility for the country. And Commissioner, in fact, went into detail on this. Second, improving the alignment between development planning and the budget framework. And we have worked as UNDP with other UN agencies to support the government in preparation of an integrated National Development Plan 3 with a full integration of SDGs into NDP 3. And this is meant to promote an integrated approach as well as to address persistent implementation challenges due to uncoordinated sectoral planning and implementation. And so we have supported the government of Uganda in the transition from sector-based planning and budgeting into program-based planning and budgetary frameworks. Similarly, and following on this, UNDP has supported the government in the development of the Program Implementation Action Plans, what are known as the PIAPs, for each of the NDP3's 20 programs, and also the review of 176 local government development plans, including 31 municipalities and 10 new cities. And these are also meant to support the MDAs and local governments prepare respective strategic plans and a foundation on which the program-based budgeting should be formulated and implemented. And also, very much aligned to this in 2021, supporting the revision of the methodology for Certificate of Compliance. That assesses then the alignment of development planning, policies, and budgeting frameworks. Another very important area of work is around the parish development model, because this is very central now for the country. And we are working with the government to develop a roadmap in partnership with Makerere University, a roadmap for the implementation of the parish development model. Thirdly, on developing and implementing an integrated national financing strategy. And here the partnership with the World Bank and other agencies to support the government of Uganda in preparing this public investment financing strategy that we are launching today. And as part of this implementation, the capacity development needs are being addressed in areas such as commercial loans negotiation. Another very important area of work is around the enabling environment to attract private and innovative financing to national priorities. Already there have been 2 bankable projects that have been developed, and these have been identified in NDP3 and undertaking 2 feasibility studies that are of great importance for the country. One is on the manufacturing of livestock vaccines, and the other is on development of ecotourism in the wider Mount Elgon region. Again, another important area of work is around the supporting of the SDG investment mapping that then provides data, information, and insights on investment opportunities for the private sector across the country. We also have been doing extensive work around the SDG implementation, working with the government, for example, the functioning of the National SDG Secretariat in the Office of the Prime Minister, and the production in Uganda of an updated SDG national roadmap and the SDGs localization process. One of the building blocks also discussed this morning was the strengthening of monitoring and review. And we have, again, also, through the SDGs process as the UN system and also with technical expertise from UNDP supported the National SDG Secretariat for the country to prepare the voluntary national reviews of the SDG progress, and then how to facilitate the sharing of this implementation exercise. Again, also working with the Office of the President, the Apex Platform Secretariat, to strengthen the oversight function on the implementation of the national development plans. We have also, Minister, as I move to conclude, looking at also other key accelerators for financing for development in Uganda. Tourism has been mentioned by PSFU this morning. Another very important area of work, again, and this has also been mentioned, is in the area of trade. Positioning Uganda as a fast mover in the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And the government of Uganda and UNDP launched the SMEs for Trade initiative to unlock potential of the AFCFTA in Uganda. And this again builds on the work of the National Industrialization Policy and its implementation strategy that is also led by the Ministry of Trade and Industry. Again, we have talked about financing facilities, and another very important facility that we are working on with the government and others is to establish a trade financing facility to harness the opportunities presented under the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. And this again is very important for private sector, for SMEs especially. UDB did talk about the work around building resilience, to climate change and climate finance. And we have also worked with, various MDAs to revise the national determined contributions for Uganda and the implementation plan. And I think what is very important for the country is to establish this climate financing facility to unlock the potential of long-term green investments. So as I conclude, I want to sincerely thank the government of Uganda through the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development for the partnership led by the UN Resident Coordinator's Office, UNDP, UNCDF, UN Women, and especially also the World Bank in developing this very important strategy and co-hosting this launch. It is our hope that the outcomes of this launch will influence the implementation of the recommendations. There has been tremendous work, a great job in the development of this strategy. Now let us have a collective and deliberate commitment to implement this strategy to achieve the vision of inclusive and sustainable development in Uganda. And I thank you. So I have been asked, on behalf of the UN Resident Coordinator, to invite the Honorable Minister to deliver his remarks. Honorable Minister, thank you.
Good morning, all of you, ladies and gentlemen. In all your capacities, I recognize you. It's with great pleasure that I welcome each of you in your different capacities to this occasion where we are publicly launching the investment financing strategy and sharing ideas about the financing for development. I'm sorry I have interfered with your program, as you have stated, but I wear so many hats. I was supposed to be here earlier, but I had other engagements, and now I am required to be somewhere at 12 noon. The overall cost of financing all government planned programs is estimated at 411.7 trillion Uganda shillings. This averages 82.3 trillion shillings over the 5-year NDP3 period. Government's budgets have been close. No, government's budget has been close to 49 trillion shillings, hence the annual financing gap of close to 33 trillion shillings. Let me repeat this. The overall cost of financing all government planned programs is estimated at 411.7 trillion Uganda shillings. This averages to 82.3 trillion shillings over the 5-year NDP 3 period. Government's budget has been close to 49 trillion shillings, hence an annual financing gap of close to 33 trillion shillings. Let me start by posing a question, ladies and gentlemen. What is it that comes to your mind when you think about sources of financing for government programs or even for your own personal development? What source do you think about? I pose that question. Probably many of you will think about borrowing and grants in domestic and foreign currency. And yet, these financing options have served the government of Uganda very well. However, in light of the huge development needs, including the Sustainable Development Goals, borrowing and grants are necessary, but not sufficient option for funding government programs. We have borrowed. We have received some, shall I call them donations? Grants. But as we speak today, I need more money. I could see somebody imitating what I did. We need more money in order to get where we want to get. Therefore, in 2015, at the third UN International Conference in Addis Ababa, the world leaders agreed upon a new global structure for financing the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. This structure required that governments develop country-specific financing strategies aimed at mobilizing additional financing away from domestic revenues, borrowing, and grants in order to support the sustainable development. Today, the government of Uganda, represented by my ministry, is happy to publicly launch and disseminate the specific financing strategy which was formulated through wide consultations with ministries, departments, and agencies of which some of you are part of. Thank you, World Bank, DFID Trust Fund, UNDP, and the Macroeconomic and Financial Management Institute for your invaluable support in finalization of this plan. I was saying just please clap for them. This strategy presents diverse financing options ranging from domestic to external and emerging financing options, some of which are non-date creating, like the use of remittances, crowdfunding, and foreign direct investments. The financing options in this strategy provide opportunities for each individual and institution to participate in the national development agenda, including children. Take, for example, at the height of COVID-19 pandemic, we were informed that a child paid heed to His Excellency the President's call, solidarity in the fight against the pandemic here in Uganda by contributing 10,000 Uganda shillings. And many of you represented here in your different capacities participated willingly at the time. Thank you for showing us that thank you for showing us that so much can be done without borrowing. Me, I'm tired of borrowing, by the way, let me tell you the truth. I'm very tired of borrowing. We must look for different ways on how we can raise funds to develop Uganda apart from borrowing. The implementation of this financing plan is a priority for government. I therefore urge every Ugandan individual, development partner, private sector player, ministry, department, and agency to peruse the strategy so that you can participate in financing for development of our country, Uganda. Now, I wanted to react. I'm short of time, as I told you, but I wanted to react to the few things that I heard here when you were presenting. Dr. Muhumuza, you talked about policies. A policy cannot cover everybody, and it can never please everybody. That's why, for example, when we increase the tax, somebody is pressurized, another one is happy. There is no policy you will develop and think that it will please everybody. Impossible. There is no government regulation that will put in place and it will please everybody. So, Dr. Muhumuza, my take is you develop a policy, but as long as it is for the good of the majority, you go with it. The ones who were left behind, we look for them and try to convince them to come and join us. That's point number one. Point number two, export finance. I think somebody talked about export finance. My friend is private sector. We are looking at this one, and we shall tell you sooner than later of how we are going to go. Air cargo, private sector, again, that is progress. It's progressing, but we shall come up with a public statement at an appropriate time. The question of irrigation, somebody also I wanted to comment on this. Agriculture today, you cannot depend, I'm a farmer personally, you cannot depend today on rain alone. Irrigation is the right way to go if our sector called agriculture is to thrive. Now, as I told you, I want to end here, but I want to thank the organizers. Thank you very much indeed. It's a pity I would have wanted to have started here in the morning until we closed, but unfortunately that has not happened. My prayer, therefore, please, Maris, a report of all the issues that have been raised and where we need to take a decision as a government. We'll take a decision. Where we want to provide, we shall provide as long as the money is available. But I want to use this opportunity to thank all of you who have contributed and will continue contributing for a job which I believe will be good and will help us to enhance our capacity to serve this country. Thank you very much indeed. Launch. Apparently that's what I came here for, basically. Can I?
Yes, just a minute. I want to invite Her Excellency Susan, of course, the World Bank, represented here by Rachel. Sheila needs to be at the front. Caroline, please come. The private sector will be represented. I see Stephen should join us, and Olivia. Sheila, please come, if we could. And then, of course, the director herself, since the Honorable Minister has now delegated that when he leaves, you are now the Minister. So, Honorable Minister, please make your way. I will hand you the microphone when Susan and the others have joined you, where you will formally launch our and disseminate our report. Oh, yes, Honorable Taiwa, please come. You need to represent Parliament because you're a critical player in this conversation. So, Honorable Minister, the ladies are going to unveil this ribbon, and then for you, you will unveil our report and, of course, the strategy itself. So please open, ladies. There you go. And then you allow the Honorable Minister unveil. Ladies and gentlemen, can we put our hands together? Honorable Minister and Her Excellency Susan, yes, there you go. Ladies and gentlemen, this formally launches and opens the dissemination of our public investment financing strategy. Honorable Minister, we'll need your signature to confirm that you are indeed launching the public investment financing strategy. Anyway, it's open, Honorable Minister. And then I will request all the other partners, after Her Excellency Susan and Sheila have penned their signature, to do the same. and then we'll have a photo moment. I'll request Dimitri and Otto to also come because you're key players in this conversation. You'll also need to append your signature to this document, and all the other key stakeholders, all right? So we will have the signing continue after, but allow us to have the photo moment. So Dimitri and Otto, if we could now join the minister and Susan in the photo. Caro, if you were next to Susan there, and Olivia, and yes. Honorable Taiwo, I think, I was about to ask you to join. There you go. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Minister of Finance has formally launched our public investment finance strategy. Another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Our conversation continues, so do not go anywhere because the Honorable Minister requested so he can make his presentation and speech and officially launch, and then he can depart, and then we will continue with the formal presentations that are going to happen in this room. So this really marks the formal launch, but the speeches continue. So allow me humbly request the cameraman, if you're done, that the Honorable Susan will walk out the minister. Honorable Minister. Yes, you are allowed gracefully, and Her Excellency Susan will walk you just to make sure that we recognize your presence in this room. And Director Maris will continue to represent the ministry here in this meeting. I now want, as soon as all the stakeholders, Stephen, I don't know if you've signed. Okay. And the signing will continue. I think, Rachel, you need to sign. And I think, Rachel, you can go with the speech also. So after signing, I can hold the speech for you. So after signing, you can address us. All right. So please, stakeholders, append your signature to our strategy. Later, we will also be unveiling and launching the framework. So please stay with us because that will happen, and the resident coordinator will lead us in the formal launch of the national framework, the integrated framework. So may I now invite, on behalf of the World Bank, Ms. Rachel Sevude to address us.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Honorable Minister, I guess you can still hear. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my name, as you've heard, Rachel Sevude, Rachel Kagwa Sevude. I'm a senior economist with the World Bank, but I stand here representing the country manager, Madam Mukami Kariuki. Let me start by thanking all of you who have joined this event and have heavily participated in launching the public investment financing strategy. The event, of course, I thank my co-hosts, the Ministry of Finance in particular, the owner, the champion, the mother or the father, the parent, whatever you want to call it, of the financing strategy, and the UNDP. For the past 10 years or so, I think the past decade or 15 years, government has increasingly prioritized capital development as one of the tools for facilitating and stimulating economic development. And this is in line with all the development plans that we've seen. I think we're in the third, but they've all been looking at the issue of prioritizing capital development. The overarching goal of that strategy has been to address the binding constraints to economic growth in the country, and in particular, to address the significant infrastructure deficit. You've heard the numbers. I don't have to repeat them because the chief, not the chief borrower, but the chief financier, the chief development planner has mentioned, and that is the Minister of Finance. And it's a daunting task that the country faces. An expansionary fiscal policy of this kind can be well justified. It is well justified indeed to provide the economic stimuli and enhance the stock of public assets, even in terms of prices, as we saw during the challenges that we had to overcome the pandemic. It allows achievement of long-term economic and development, economic growth and development, and hence reduces poverty in the long run. The very low, we've had lots of, during the discussion, the panelists highlighted the low electricity access, the high cost of infrastructure, the poor infrastructure, the transit infrastructure issues, limited access to safe water, sanitation, and so on and so forth. And these affect millions of Ugandans every day. And these require investment now and in the years to come. It remains difficult to see how higher investments can yield returns if the quality of projects is poor. I'll start from there. If the quality of projects is poor. Quality issues arise from poor designs, so I can't forget where we're coming from to come to the financing. It comes from poor designs of projects, delays in implementation, cost escalations, time overruns, contract disputes, abandonment of projects, substandard quality of completed projects, rapid depreciation of public stock, as well as how these are funded. Some of the problems that we're listing as problems of public investments actually come from the way we organize the funding, what kind of funding we actually use to fund these projects, and how we even manage the funding that we get to fund these projects. Government has recognized these challenges. And has been undertaking reforms to strengthen the public investment management agenda in totality. We applaud government on taking this giant step to have a clear financing strategy for public investments, because it doesn't help to have a good project and then use bad finance to come and finance it. As I've mentioned, the challenges that we see are also arising from the financing end. The financing strategy we are launching today is a linchpin in the agenda of promoting growth and development. Whether it's within the domestic arena, whether it's a small informal person trying to save something to raise the domestic revenue and to make sure that we can actually finance our development locally, whether it's raising savings through the financial system, or whether it is from the external sources that we've been depending on for some time. It all requires a strategy. And its options are as clear. The options that have been included in this financing strategy are as clear as the objectives. Most importantly, to organize finance that will enable government to spearhead development in a sustainable manner. The World Bank has been, and is still fully behind government in addressing this challenge. In addition to probably the largest source of non-concessional financing that supports countries elsewhere, but also Uganda, to support the important development agenda, the World Bank also works with government to close gaps in policies, regulatory environment, and building capacity, among others, through our knowledge and advisory pillar. A key source of support, for example, for this particular reform has been through the Multi-Donor Trust Fund, and I'm glad that the Minister thanked the Trust Fund for supporting us to undertake this work. And that trust fund was to support implementation of the national development plans, but most importantly, it was resourced by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK government. So in a special way, we thank FCDO. I don't know whether they are represented, but we have to recognize that they actually provided the resources that have brought us to this level today. One of the windows of this trust fund supported the key objective of fostering improvements in economic governance, fiscal management, and service delivery by addressing capacity gaps in operations to accelerate the implementation of programs within the public sector and or remove constraints to implementation within the private sector. So when we do these public things, it's not that we're just supporting the public sector. It's also address those constraints that will allow this country to be a private sector driven economy. It is easy to talk about it that we want the private sector to be the driver, but if you don't address the constraints that constrain the private sector, then you haven't actually put the private sector in their seat. The interventions carried out through the trust fund went through a number of institutions, but maybe in a number, for the sake of time, I won't mention any, but they developed decision-making tools, including relevant strategies like this one, policies, guidelines in line with a theory of change of having more efficient and effective systems for public investment management that will ultimately increase the returns to investment and thereby promote faster growth and the capacities, the country's capacity to manage its debt. Implementation of these reforms is not a small challenge given the political economy. Yeah, we normally shy away from talking about these issues, but you might have a strategy today that says you should finance this project using this particular type of finance because it's the most suited. But tomorrow you get a suggestion from the high authorities that maybe a new type of financing has been required, has been availed that will actually ease the financing. So we have to be ready to face all these challenges. If we don't manage the political dynamic, economic dynamics along the way, then we'll not be able to achieve what we put on paper as has been put down in this financing strategy. We do believe an event like this will achieve the following: raise knowledge about the importance of strengthening public investment management by financing them well through this strategy, sensitize all stakeholders from across government and the public about the program interventions, about this strategy that have to be undertaken to strengthen public investment management and demonstrate value for money for all the effort. Your resources today, for example, why are we seated here discussing? So at the end of the day, the implementation will be critical so that we can get value for money for all the interventions that we've put into this. As I conclude, I take this opportunity to reaffirm the World Bank's commitment to supporting Uganda's development agenda. As a development partner, we appreciate the commitment and zeal that the country continues to demonstrate in exploring alternative and more efficient models of development. You've heard the minister say he's tired of borrowing. But if we are tired of borrowing, then we have to get more efficient, innovative ways of financing development because we want to develop. If there are no funds, then we'll borrow. We have to find the financing. We have to move ahead as a country. I do hope that our efforts are rewarded with a more efficient and effective system that will, at the end of the day, maximize returns on investment and maximize development outcomes. We look forward to an effective implementation of the strategy. I thank you very much.
I'm not so sure whether it's the lunch that is calling and your hand clubs are fewer, but can we give our partner, the World Bank, a better hand club? Caroline Anderson to come and make remarks on behalf of the head of the EU delegation to Uganda.
Thank you very much. I see that Maurice has fully integrated the Team Europe concept. Thank you for that. We have brainwashed him, definitely. So my name is Caroline Adriaansen. I'm the head of cooperation at the delegation of the European Union in Uganda. I'm representing the ambassador here, who couldn't make it, unfortunately. I would like to acknowledge all of you present. I will not go in the interest of time. I will not go through the whole protocol, but I want to acknowledge at least Maris, who was here, who is, I think, has stepped out for now, our partner in the EU-Uganda partnership. Then, of course, the representatives of NPA who are here as well, UDB, important partner for us as well, URA, the Honorable Member of Parliament who was here earlier as well. Then, of course, the Executive Director of PSFU, the Ugandan Chamber of Commerce as well, Ms. Olive Chigongo, and then the UN Resident Coordinator and the whole UN family present here, together also with the World Bank and other development partners, then the representatives of civil society. I saw some representatives here. So distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be here today to participate in the launch and the dissemination of this strategy, the Public Investment and Financing Strategy. The strategy will be for the years to come an essential reference, a guiding framework for matching government programs with financing options, minimizing the costs and risks when pursuing those options, for unlocking new financing from traditional but also non-traditional sources, and for partnering with the private sector in the implementation and the financing of public investment programs and projects. I would like to acknowledge the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, the National Planning Authority, NPA, and UNDP for having completed successfully this very complex formulation process, from analyzing the status quo, the limitations, towards projecting the future public investment needs and the required instruments. During this journey, 15 very diverse financing options have been analyzed, and these range from tax and non-tax revenue to foreign direct investment, remittances, philanthropy, crowdfunding, to name only a few. Now, this strategy has been developed as part of the broader framework, which is the Integrated National Financial Framework, the INFF, which has already been mentioned earlier, I understand, by the different speakers. This framework is spearheaded by Ministry of Finance and the Debt and Cash Directorate, led by Ms. Maris Wanyera here, with whom we share for many years a solid partnership. Uganda is one of the 16 pioneer countries, I think, where the EU and UNDP have actually partnered together to support the INFF process. So why as EU have we decided to support the INFF and to fund, provide financial resources at a global level to support this process in a number of countries? First of all, because it's a country-led process, and second, because we see this mechanism as an opportunity to strengthen our policy-based dialogue or policy-based partnership with Uganda. Because where many countries display a high level of commitment to achieve SDGs, there's only very few that have actually clearly outlined where the financing to fund these ambitions would come from. And Uganda is one of those very few countries. By progressively shaping and refining this financial framework, developing a better understanding of the national financial landscape, and coordinate efforts to mobilize and align a wide range of financing sources to manage risks and achieve these SDG targets. So this strategy is an important milestone within this broader framework. We see it also as a tool to help development partners align their projects and initiatives with the development priorities and the investment priorities of the government. It looks at a number of non-traditional, innovative financing sources, and as EU, as a matter of fact, we have approved just recently a 15 million euro support to climate finance. There were several references to climate finance earlier in the discussion. This is definitely an important source of funding, and we are looking how to support Uganda in unlocking the potential of climate finance. We will be supporting at a national level the dedicated unit in the Ministry of Finance, working together with the Ministry of Finance and GGGI, notably on the green bonds. We have brought in some experts from Europe to share their experience on the European green bond initiatives and see how Uganda could benefit from that experience and expertise. We will also be supporting climate finance at a local district level, working together with our partners here, UNCDF, on the initiative Local, and we will be working with the private sector as well in this area. We also mentioned earlier the work we do with UDB and other partners, including again UNCDF and others, on access to finance for small and medium enterprises. We have a portfolio of about 60 million euros with several facilities that seek to help private sector accessing affordable finance from wherever they are in their stage of growth, from women entrepreneurs, smallholder farmers, to bigger entry tickets, $500,000 and up, to long-term patient capital through private equity. So we have like a whole range of facilities that look at this. So it's very important to see how, as development partners, through our initiatives, we can align to the strategy and the different financing sources and options that have been outlined there. I would like to encourage, however, all the government, but also all the other stakeholders to maybe look at one particular aspect of Uganda's current and future public investment. That aspect is the direct potential for employment of public investment in key infrastructure, that is roads, schools, hospital, water, sanitation, electricity, affordable housing, greening the economy. Creating jobs, especially for the youth, is already and will be one of Uganda's major policy challenge in the short, medium and longer term. So the direct and indirect employment impact of public investment and alternative public investments and of the various financing and implementation modalities that have been analyzed in the strategy will be an essential element, an essential parameter in the equation. So I would like to encourage the government and all the actors here to take the analysis maybe one step further, look at how maybe do some additional analytics, insights, policy reflections to establish a link between every billion Ugandan shilling of public investment and the estimated jobs created. This would allow to distinguish investments with high labor content from those with low labor content. And we think this could contribute further to the discussion and to the development agenda of the country. With this, please allow me to conclude by assuring you that the European Union will remain a committed partner of the government of Uganda in its pursuit to create more and better labor market opportunities and to support its public investment agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Caroline. And we were very strategic in allowing the private sector sit next to you. So the funding that you're speaking to, that is going to the private sector, I think Stephen is strategically digging into the vault. May I now take the pleasure of inviting the resident coordinator of the UN, Her Excellency Susan.
Thank you very much. Let me start by recognizing Director Maris and all the colleagues from the Ministry of Finance. Let me also recognize all the senior government officials who are here with us, colleagues from private sector, from civil society, our development partner friends, and of course my own UN family members. Good afternoon to everybody. On behalf of the entire United Nations system in Uganda, I'm very pleased to participate at this launch of the Public Investment Financing Strategy. The strategy, which is the third of 5 blocks of the Integrated National Financing Framework, partly actualizes the means of implementation for the Sustainable Development Goals, as agreed upon by world leaders in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on Financing for Development. It is also a basis to build in a multi-stakeholder approach to strengthening coherence across financing policies and institutions, both state and non-state. And of course, I wish to commend the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development for its political and technical leadership in driving the process for the Integrated National Financing Framework in Uganda. I must recognize that Uganda, as has been mentioned by Caroline and others, is one of the very first countries. We have UN Women, and we will have a new incoming member. The financial and technical contribution of the UN's global partners also, I think, needs to be recognized. The EU, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the government of Italy, and traditional forms of finance, such as ODA. These challenges, I think, have exacerbated liquidity issues, increased budget deficits, and magnified vulnerability to debt distress. The emerging trends have increased the relevance of the Integrated National Financing Framework. I was quite shocked, actually. I'd never realized what the gap was until the minister said that the gap, and my maths is not very good, but that sounded to me like it was close to 40%. So it is significant. And while this strategy would have been important before the crisis that we're facing now, it is even more important now that we really spend a lot of energy in trying to implement it well. The 5th UN Conference on the Least Developed Countries that was held this month in Doha re-emphasized the crucial need for low-income countries to revisit their approaches to development financing. Many of the proposals that have been made in the public investment financing strategy, as I understand, have not really been implemented in Uganda, but they have been implemented elsewhere, including in other developing countries. So to support the successful implementation of this strategy, perhaps we should also invest in supporting capacity building and peer-to-peer learning through South-South and triangular cooperation. And the UN, of course, remains available to support that. Government has done an important job towards strengthening the tax policy, as was mentioned before, and administration through the domestic revenue mobilization strategy. However, there have been reservations with regards to tax incentives. Whereas this approach has been used in many developing countries as a means of attracting foreign direct investment, there have been concerns around the transparency and effectiveness of tax holidays and tax exemptions. Tax holidays and exemptions should be complementary and not be seen as an alternative to creating an enabling business climate, which of course is more valued incentive for attracting FDI. So we need to focus more on addressing the basic energy and transport infrastructure gaps, reducing bureaucracy and cost of administrative requirements, strengthening the rule of law in business and contractual processes. And of course, if tax incentives are maintained, they really should be kept at the lowest level and restructured to ensure transparency and fairness in the implementation. And a couple of months back, if I'm not mistaken, when CS Bag was doing some presentation, I remember hearing the PSST talk very much about this, so I understand that this is something the government of Uganda is really looking into. With public debt growing towards worrisome levels in many places, and with limits to how much we can mobilize domestically, the country also needs to complement these traditional sources by policy and institutional reforms that are relevant for the emerging financing landscape, public-private partnerships, philanthropy, climate finance, bonds, Islamic finance, among others. Some of these have been mentioned before. And we will all need the enabling laws, policies, and institutions. And I think I'm a broken record, but because I think in my 18 months plus, I always talk about coordination. It is critical for everything we do. And with such a strategy that's multi-stakeholder, different parts of government, different development partners, we will absolutely need Ministry of Finance to make sure that there's a very active role in coordinating, pulling us together, making sure that we see how we're progressing together in the implementation of this policy, if we're going to see results. Mobilization of development financing is as important as ensuring efficiency, effectiveness, and transparency in the utilization of these resources at national and subnational levels for achievement of development goals. Globally, UNICEF, one of the UN agencies, has been implementing the Open Budget Survey, overseeing budget transparency, public participation, and oversight. As part of the UN support to the INFF process in Uganda, the UNICEF country office has also expressed readiness to join the other UN family members that were mentioned to support government in these efforts. Lastly, in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the private sector was expected to assume a unique role in financing sustainable development. Yet mobilization of private sector financing for SDGs in low-income countries and least developed countries, where it is most needed, is just about 12% of the potential, compared to the 48% in upper middle income countries. So we have a lot of work to do. To accelerate the pace and scale of development financing through the private sector, a more proactive private sector engagement approach based on jointly defined results will be required. Presently, there has not been adequate engagement, at least from what an outsider can see, private engagement with the private on matters of development and sustainability beyond traditional business discussions. The launch of the public investment financing strategy is just the beginning of a long journey that will require complementary efforts from all stakeholders. The UN system in Uganda reiterates its commitment to collaborate with the government and other stakeholders to improve the financing mechanism for the Uganda Vision 2040 and the Third National Development Plan. And I think nobody here disputes the importance of this strategy. We cannot, especially hearing those stark numbers from the minister. But to make sure that we really get the most out of it, we really would require the Ministry of Finance to really drive the coordination aspects and really make sure that all those who have a responsibility for the implementation of this strategy are doing that which they need to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And that concludes the formal speeches. Before we run to the highlights, because Joy is going to come and run us through today's highlights, which the Honorable Minister asked for. So, Maris, we are doing your homework. Huh? The Honorable Minister asked for these highlights. I wanted, I think, to re-echo what Susan just said, and I'm glad Stephen and Oliver are here. The proactive private sector engagement. I think the conversations which, as you mentioned, CS-BAG, who are now with Accord and the Ministry of Finance have a tripartite, along with the people of Uganda, in trying to make the budget more inclusive, have been saying we need to find alternative funding for our investment appetite, as a country. So Stephen, of course, it was interesting that while Stephen was on the panel, he was telling the minister, I want energy costs to come down. I want roads. We need to think about railway. In my head, I kept saying, borrow, borrow, borrow. All right? But Stephen didn't say, please borrow this money. Stephen said, we can find alternative financing. And I'm glad that a very fantastic idea that came during COVID when we were sourcing for funds for food and vehicles. I mean, I see brand new cars for the Ministry of Health and they were all donated. through this, crowd financing and funding, that now the Ministry of Finance is actually thinking of developing a policy on crowd financing. And Ugandans will actually support you. But as they give you money, we need to be mindful. They will need to, first of all, know that you're very frugal with their money and that there is accountability for their money. And I think we can't lose both. So, Maris, as you do the policy, please tell us where you're going to close the holes, those loopholes in the system. Digital is working. I don't know if any of you know that, for example, I'll give you one great example. The local government is rolling out, I think, 2 different digital financing projects. They're all supported by, of course, development partners. But one town council, I'll give mine, where I used to be not so long ago, Nansana, I think was collecting about 700 million a month, or I think for a given period, and I'm sure the team will find out. The other day, the local government ministry was shocked. That Nansana collected 7 billion. That Nansana. And why? Because they've closed the loopholes. No one is bringing money to the town council. People are using a digital system to bank the money, and then the local government sees it on their platform, on their dashboard, and they're able to confirm that this kiosk at this particular location has paid for their trading license. And all they do is when they come to the kiosk, they have a phone to verify the payment. And we're saying, so why are we still paying cash? Why? Let's digitize this system. Let's just remove all the loopholes in the system, and then Ugandans will contribute to the crowd. Trust me, we will contribute to this space. That said, Joy, you are the one who's coming here because I was buying you time. I know as you are concluding. You and Maris? Okay, Maris, please come. You're closing because the highlights are what we take away from this conversation, and they will speak to the report to the ministry. But I also wanted to let you know that I think with the guidance of the ministry, and I think Maris will speak to this, the launch of INF, and Maris will tell us whether we will need another meeting to launch INF, the integrated framework. But that is an open conversation we have. What we are doing from here on is to disseminate the strategy, which speaks to the alternative financing models the government is putting in place. So Maris, you're welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last time I'm asking you to clap, so we can put our hands together for Maris.
So thank you so much, and I'm not supposed to be responding to issues and making another speech. I know I'm standing between you and lunch, and Joy is supposed to quickly give us a recap. But there's one item that was supposed to be launched, and it was going to address the issue raised by Madam Susan concerning strengthening coordination. So the Honorable Minister was supposed to to inaugurate the Oversight Committee for the INF today. And I think some members who are supposed to be on that committee are here. And I think there was also somebody who commented that MAIF is left out. It is not only MAIF, but we also forgot to include the representatives of the Development Committee. The other challenge we have is that we haven't received all the nominees, because you're supposed to receive the names, the people who are going to be on this committee. So we are requesting, again with our good partners, that once we have received all the nominations, we'll have a mini launch. It may not be of this nature, because the Honorable Minister has done his part. He's not expecting to be called back. But it will be a mini launch, and the public will be informed about the members of this committee in order to strengthen that coordination. And the PIFs requires close collaboration amongst all the stakeholders, and especially the private sector. It's not easy to bring them on board if they are not part of these committees. So we'll call upon you, not all of you, the members of the institutions that will have representation on this committee at another time, very soon, to have the formal launch of this entity as we roll out all these very good proposals, plus what we have. The new proposals are coming out of what we, as the Ministry of Finance, have identified as possible solutions to the problem we are facing now. So I'll request Joy. I wasn't writing. It was you and Joy doing that, right? So Joy, I will invite Joy to come and quickly. Oh, okay. There was an issue that came out from the gentleman who said he attended COP 27, and he wanted to know how is it integrated in this. I think it's one of those instruments that we are targeting to finance the programs. It also includes the carbon credit and many other things. So I don't know who's going to be representing you, but I believe that the relevant stakeholders, especially those who have been participating in forums where we are discussing climate financing, are going to be there to ensure that we take up this resource or don't leave out. Apart from leaving out the Ugandans, we are also not leaving out any likely resource that can help us to move away from debt financing. Don't say that I will have no job. No, I still have a job. I'll still have it because the projects are running. We have to follow them up, but we have to mobilize other affordable or donations or even just technical support, especially bringing on board all these technologies, digitization and everything. So thank you so much. And Joy, I don't think we have a lot of time. You may just give some highlights and then we'll do a proper report that will be circulated to all the stakeholders who have attended today. Thank you. Thank you, MC. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Madam Director. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience. And so because of that, I'm going to just give us a snapshot of the highlights, and then we can have the report as Director mentioned much later. So the first point is that we all need to work together for these policies and strategies to work. So let us do our work and do it right. That is one of the comments that came from the Honorable Member of Parliament. And then we need to take inclusion seriously. For example, people with disabilities and others will also need to leverage on technology in other areas. We need to roll out a few branches of the UDB across the country to, ensure this inclusivity of other players. We need to support people at the bottom of the pyramid because this is key for structural transformation, especially regarding to financing. Another point is that each Ugandan in the tax bracket needs to continue paying our taxes in a compliant manner. URA has put in place systems to pay our taxes in a transparent and fair manner. This will help government lessen the burden of borrowing. From the private sector side, we noted that export finance is one of the biggest constraints to business development. And so this has to be unlocked to boost exports, given the growing market in the diaspora. SMEs need to be supported to reduce the costs levied by the Bureau of Standards. There is also need to reduce energy tariffs, support the railways to reduce the cost of $130 per month in transportation, but also we need to construct and rehabilitate more roads to reduce the estimated 52 working days in a year where, those that drive are stuck in traffic jam. We also need to establish the bus rapid system and the Uganda Air Cargo, but also enhance irrigation so that we can reduce dependence on the weather. The public investment financing strategy is a working document which will be reviewed after every 3 years to ensure inclusivity, but also bring on board the emerging finance options. Mrs. Rachel Sebude talked about the fact that, you know, you may have aligned a particular financing option to a program, but then a new financing option emerges. So, you know, such examples will necessitate us to review the public investment strategy. And then one of the key vehicles to increase savings is to grow the economy, and government, through various initiatives, is striving to do this. For example, through agro-industrialization, capitalizing UDB, but also implementation of the parish development model. However, UDB has to open up more branches, or like Mr. Muhumuza said, I mean, the UDB could use agents just like, you know, banks are doing. There's also need to leverage on technology to increase savings for both the formal and the informal sector. We noted that the key accelerators of growth include tourism and trade, and so this is, Mr. Asimwe is passionate about this. We need to do so much in that area. We also need to unlock the potential of climate finance. And yes, we need to unlock the potential of climate finance. Then the minister talked about policies. We need to develop policies, but as long as they are good, because there's been the idea that, you know, policies sometimes leave out certain people, but we need to develop policies, and as long as they are good, for the majority, we may need to implement them and find ways of bringing other people on board. And then we need to find more efficient ways of financing development to reduce borrowing. That is what the public investment financing strategy is supposed to do. Thank you very much.
Well done, Joy. I noticed that you left out one very critical one, but maybe because it came in the Q&A session. I think when you talked about inclusiveness, we were told we need to also be human rights inclusive. So I took that personally, and we will work on being more human rights inclusive. And I think we left, you know, when we go by the SDGs, not leaving no one behind, there is a category we left out. Sometimes when you have a strategy that speaks to the interests of everyone, women, the disabled, then you must have, or you must, in the room, you must bring them on board. And I'm glad I am speaking to you, because I'm now replying. We, as the Minister of Finance, through Maris, are going to be more inclusive. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, I really want to thank all of you for staying with us, and you really have earned your lunch. So on behalf of UNDP, the World Bank, and the Ministry of Finance, I invite you to lunch. Lunch is at Paradise. The ushers will guide you as you walk down to the lunch serving center. Please have these conversations continue. The Ministry of Finance, and I think you've seen that through Maris herself, is still open to ideas of how we can bring down our debt to GDP. We are not doing badly, but we are also really at the margins. And a lot of us are looking at Maris and saying, can we bring this figure down? We know what has happened in some quarters in the neighborhood. We also know that, you know, the ministry has been doing quite a bit of work on reducing public expenditure. I don't know if all of you have felt it in your pockets, but I know that I have through the UBC. So it is very critical that you know, everyone plays their part for us to support this development agenda. And I know NPA is driving this conversation in support with the development partners. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy your lunch and have a safe trip back to your offices. I hope not home, but your offices. Thank you.